Trying to figure out where I'm going to pick up the best sound.
I got you the screw cap one, so if you decide you don't want to drink the whole thing, you have one to take it out.
It's all about options. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, this is. Did we sell it because we needed money? Didn't we have the real brownie?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, so this is an upgrade. I was concerned if we were starting to sell furniture. No, I wasn't concerned, I just wanted to know if we were selling the furniture. This is as close as I'm ever going to get. Does that sound like our hammer?
So in the summer, I guess 3 summers ago, I spent 2 weeks and stayed in that.
What'd you do? Good.
This meeting is on the
My stepmom is like, what, tanning?
Yeah, okay.
And occasionally I would walk.
I'll send you my way.
But it's weird.
I forgot which side it was. I do remember you mentioned it.
And this business is business.
They're going to sell it.
Once I get to the point where I have to wear hearing aids, then you can get 2 hearing aids. The one that's on this side, you can do 2 on the other side. They're just still getting sounds, so like each sound makes a difference. It was just me, it was
So they're fine. There's not like, they're excited to be fine.
My dad was talking about how it's
Did that just start? Or did you have that?
Once it worked, it started feeling like I had a cold. My head was starting to congest. And I went home and I laid down. And I just stand up for most of that.
Yeah, I used to come down a lot. But I think just really bad tennis because it's in the theater. So it's just between the go buy lottery.
That's why everybody knows.
So,
Culver City has
Here, I'm trying.
and because all those houses are like,
And by the time you're done, it's like, oh,
to the, financial institution.
right, yeah.
It's a little different.
Just have a
So we're gonna start at 6:05. I'm just saying, in case Dave is a little late. Just let me know what.
David is still in another meeting and is in his office right now.
He's what?
David is still in the meeting in his office with the chamber. He'll be here as soon as that's over.
All right, so we'll just start. I will call this meeting to order at 6:06. And if we can stand for the pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, can we take a roll call, please?
Yes. Committee member Brock.
Here.
Committee member, Rush.
Is that Bush?
Bush, I'm sorry. I have it right, I thought I had it wrong. Okay, Bush.
Committee member Bush is here.
Committee member Davis, absent at the moment. Vice Chair Carr. And Chair Burrow.
Here. Welcome, guests. We're going to start off with just to know that the agenda items may be reordered during the meeting at the discretion of the body. There's a lot to cover tonight. I don't anticipate that happening, but it may. So, public input. Public input is permitted only on items not on the agenda that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the body. State law prohibits the body from taking any action on items not listed in the agenda, including issues raised under this agenda item. Find out if there are any public speakers on site.
Yes, we do have two public speakers. The first is Horace Hertz.
Yes.
And you'll have 2 minutes, Mr. Hertz.
Okay. Thank you.
Where should he stand safely here?
Right here, because of the recording right here. Right here's good.
Okay. Hi, my name is Horace Hertz. I've been in Santa Monica for 13 years. I know my wife. I just want to apologize beforehand because I want to be very blunt and I might offend some people, so I apologize. But I've been in the financial world for 45 years. I have worked with a lot of companies at the precipice of the bankruptcy of this. And I think we're technically bankrupt, and I don't see much action. Because when the company's technically bankrupt, and I tell you why you say we're technically bankrupt, there's an unfunded pension liability that is going to get progressively worse. If anybody thinks that we can get an 8% return on a very diversified portfolio, I will sign up today for a 5%. That's number one. Number two, we have several lawsuit settlements that are coming down that have not. And third, we have costs to fight the districting, whether we win or lose this case. I don't see the city saying we need to curtail all expenses. When I work with companies that are bankrupt, the first thing you do is you identify all the expenses and you say what's a must and what is a need and what is not a must. The non-must are all curtailed. Actually, they're eliminated until you can break even on a cash basis. I don't see that happening. I keep reading approvals of expenses that have nothing to do with what we need to do, which is safety. Our city, in my opinion, needs to be safe before we can recover, so we can generate enough revenue to get the city back in financial stability. Everybody talks about environmental sustainability. How about financial sustainability? Where does that come from? If there's no financial sustainability, the environment will make no difference. Thank you.
Next we have John Allen.
Question before I start. Are all the, Mr. Chair, are all the members present tonight?
Except for Mayor Davis and Committee Davis.
I'm not sure how many of you have reviewed tonight's agenda items and the attachments. I have. They're all here. The Audit Subcommittee is not a city commissioner board. It's supposed to determine what corrective action should be recommended by council to council. Some of whom are here, including our mayor. Lingering issues. Over $2 million in city funds given to the people concerned remain unaccounted for, and still no shelter for those brought in need between 4 and 8. 2. Why was the Moss Adams report first reviewed and edited by by City Manager White and staff before given to council and public. 3, stated on page 49 of the Moss Adams report, there is only a 47% shelter bed utilization. Our research shows a complete failure of the existing service providers. No wonder we have more homeless on the streets, not being consistent. 4, Santa Monica's largest, or one of the largest, single third-party vendors is Community Corps. It began with us 42 years ago in '82. There are conflicts of interest, and it has and is controlled by SMERF. We need a shorter RFP process so our city becomes more inclusive, and our vendors are not entitled. 5, we have growing unfunded pension liabilities that have been unaddressed for years. This important committee should meet more than 4 times a year. It's too important. All these items have not been timely addressed, and if they're not, we'll bring them to the courts. Who will? And the time we will be spending now will be spent with the courts and attorneys producing the information on behalf of the taxpayers at great expense. Thank you.
And that's all we have for general public comment. Next is public input on remaining agenda items. And we have one speaker, Denise Barton. And Ms. Barton, I have you down for 2 items, 3B and 3C. Yeah. So about 4 minutes.
Good evening. This is on page 3 of the airport where it states under experienced staff, airport staff possesses the knowledge and experience to perform the real estate management and leasing duties. Yet on page 8 under staffing capacity, it states current staffing is not adequate to complete all necessary functions within a certain time frame and defined control structure, resulting in increased workload for management. Not to mention needing to prioritize right-sizing financially focused functions across the team. In addition, on page 6 of the record keeping, it claims confusion among airport property management staff about which documents are required under different lease types, as well as being unable to locate the templates for those documents. And finally, on page 8 at the bottom paragraph where it clearly states the airport staff do not have any financially focused team members, leading to confusion and delays. Do these examples show the experienced staff labeled on page 3? To me, it does not. Although the city does seem to be putting airport staff at further disadvantage by not having easily accessible information documents and templates, as well as training videos, which also are not easily accessible. And how hard is it to structure it with 4 staff? 2 leasing and insurance, one does property management, and the other does the accounting portion. In ending, I hate to think that these results are due to the hiring of DEI and not of merit or ability, because this report again shows no one is getting its money's worth from the city. Or would it be being done like this so it looks like the city's receiving less than it really does? Next, another dysfunctional department in the city. I personally wonder if all city hall departments are as dysfunctional as food services. Oh yeah, the city council separated that department into 3 departments. But it does make my point that city hall staff do as little as possible to be paid as much as possible. On that point, city staff needs to return to work with city hall. I realize that may not make city staff as happy as they are at home, but this report is just another example as to how all tasks associated with their positions is not being completed in a timely manner, if at all. Then Moss Adams was unable to fully reconcile any of the programs listed to a total amount of over $1.4 million for the people concerned. And after the public has spoken out about this organization for so long, yet the council continues giving millions of dollars to this organization. How much do you want to bet? The more you give them, the more they steal. I hope their more current and past year's budgets will be compared to their general ledger details, which should be due to see how much they are unable to reconcile. Or think about it this way, if you give funding to organizations that never follow up, do you not think that the organizations think you never will? So how does the city plan to get the grant funding back? And was it state or federal granting which needs to be reported to? Or would the city be liable for paying back the grant funding? Because after the continuing piled lawsuit settlement, I'm sure everyone in the city is tired of having to pay for the city's
That is it for public input tonight.
Thank you. The next item is a special agenda item, election of the chair.
Yes, that's being withdrawn at the request of staff to be held at the next meeting.
Okay. Should that have been run by the chair?
It kind of happened at the last minute. We realized that the chair and the vice chair should have been, the election should have been held at the same time simultaneously, but the election of the vice chair wasn't noticed properly, so we're doing them both at the same time in the next meeting. Or we can still do the chair, selection of the chair, we just can't do the vice chair tonight.
Why don't we do the chair and then we'll do the vice chair? So, we have nominations for the chair. Commissioner Brock.
I nominate Mark Verbill.
Do we have a second on that nomination?
Yes, I'll second that.
Jim Bush seconds the nomination. Can we have a roll call?
Or any other nominations?
Or any other nominations? Please?
Okay. Committee member Brock,
Yes.
committee member Bush,
Yes.
committee member Davis,
Yes.
committee member Park, or vice chair Park,
Yes.
and committee member River.
Yes. Okay, next item on the agenda, airport KPI and process improvement update, and that's Moss Adams.
I don't think you need it.
This is working.
Oh, it does.
This is working. My screen is not blue. Perfect, there it goes. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Steve McKenney. I'm a partner at Moss Adams and leader of the construction and real estate advisory team. Tonight, I'll be going over the City of Santa Monica Airport Property Management and Leasing Review Update. First, we just want to give a big thanks to the city. This is not a required audit procedure, but it's really, the staff wanted to do a follow-up on the review report that we performed earlier, and they want to get better. It's evident from the interviews that they want us to figure out where the pain points were, come up with constructive recommendations, and help the organization get better. So we just wanted to give a shout out to the city and airport management for being proactive, being frank within the interview, saying what's working, what's not. I think it helped develop a good work product for you all and a good roadmap to improving the operation. Is it too loud?
Is it working?
It wasn't working.
Can you guys hear me?
Can we ignore the microphone?
Ignore the mic. Okay, high level summary. So we focused on processes, reports, KPIs, operational efficiencies, and measurables towards the industry standard. We provided recommendations to improve the existing processes and demonstrate how to better track tasks can be beneficial to the airport overall performance. Of the 13 prior observations from the February 2023 report, 1 is complete. 5 are in progress or ongoing with no additional recommendations. In 7, we added new recommendations just from kind of processes changing, additional feedback provided, which we hope is helpful for the airport and the city staff. All right, so here we provide the table.
And it's, can you guys see that all right? Or is that pretty? Is that a little better? All right, so I'll do a summary. If we have questions, I can dive into it. So our updated recommendations are really grouped into 7 different categories: staff capacity, roles and responsibilities, data utilization, property maintenance, long-term planning, and project management, and record keeping. And I think the most easiest way to describe this or explain this is group it into a couple different categories. So the first one is staff capacity, roles and responsibilities, and property maintenance. When we did the interviews with staff, it was a noted observation that people didn't feel like they had enough resources to complete their jobs. I think some of the software systems are in flux of being implemented, and there weren't a lot of documented policy procedures on standard operating procedures of how each of the staff should be conducting themselves in addition to the roles and responsibilities. So the highest level recommendation that will kind of spread across several of these is continuing right-sizing the workloads through software implementations, which you have 2 that are upcoming, the RD and the maintenance connections, which I think will be a significant improvement. Outsourcing, so you guys have the Aeroplex organization that is able to support with workload demands. We did note that they have been providing training on standard operating procedures for certain components, which is great. And then the responsibility, clarification, and enhancement of communication, which will tie to the RACI matrix, which we think will be a significant improvement. When we were doing some interviews, there was a bottleneck in terms of decision making, and we feel that if you have a way of saying who's responsible, who's accountable, who should be consulted, who should be informed for the various levels, that will help optimize and empower. I think staff is one of the words that we thought would be appropriate and relevant, so they were empowered to kind of make the decisions to perform their duties. For training, there was a good practice noted that they are developing a tenant order procedural document, but I think with all the systems coming online, with the various parties involved in the operation, more established policy procedures, one to guide operations, but also to serve as a training tool would be a good addition. And then maintenance. From the interviews that we conducted, it was noted that not having a dedicated airport maintenance person created additional potentially unnecessary workflows to get someone to take care of task orders. You guys have over 400 leases, and sometimes you need kind of that direct line to be able to allocate a potential personnel to a task that needs to be completed. And then the RACI matrix, when I went over, just kind of having that framework built in place, it's pretty easy to put together. One, really by each of the core procedural areas to really guide and empower staff and management. And then the property maintenance, which I talked about on the technology side, where you guys are evaluating maintenance connections and additional modules, potentially other software systems, is my understanding, and making sure that you guys have a clear list of the requirements, how it's going to interface with the current software systems, and Yardi additionally to make sure that the systems are talking to each other, you're getting the report output that you guys need to manage your program. And we'll get into that a little bit further with the data utilization. The next 2 groupings I'm going to put together is the long-term planning and project management. So as a good practice, you guys are currently doing a needs assessment. The needs assessment is going to guide the capital plan, the deferred maintenance, and potentially the equipment management. So as a great practice to set up for tracking your results is utilizing the needs assessment to understand what the needs are, what the wants are, prioritizing scope so that you can realistically forecast over the next 5 years what can be done with funding currently available. If we have needs that need to get done, what are going to be the revenue sources to achieve those objectives? same concept with deferred maintenance is what needs to get done across all these leases and facilities. And how does it line up with current cash flow spending, et cetera. So I think having that formal documented plan is critical to set you up for assessing how you're doing real time from a KPI perspective. You need that baseline to say, are we on track, are we off track? Equipment management, we're rolling up into the long-term plan. You guys have a lot of significant equipment items. They aren't being tracked as probably efficiently or effectively as they could be. So ensuring that the considerations built into, I think maintenance connections got the ability to track it with the different warranty conditions, maintenance requirements, etc. Equipment, I think, is one of your largest CapEx line items, excluding kind of real estate and construction. So making sure that you're taking care of the pieces of equipment, you're tracking them appropriately and utilizing them within your operations, I think will help with efficiencies. And then I'll roll over to data utilization. Having the baseline long-term planning is a critical component to evaluate whether your operations on or off track. So when you get the 2 new systems online, you're going to have a lot more data that's available. So really understanding what the data is, the data integrity, and lining that up with the KPIs that we've reported within our report, just making sure that you're performing according to plan. The other note with the data utilization is we did know that some of the insurance tracking and monitoring is done in a very manual basis, and there was during the interviews there was noted instances of that. It was a ongoing problem where you kind of had to figure out what was missing, and then it was a very manual effort. So I think within kind of these new systems and reporting capabilities, getting a better handle on the insurance tracking, monitoring procedurals, process and procedures, and reporting, can ensure that you're compliant within that area. And then finally, record keeping, just making sure file structure within the system is consistent, it's well documented so that whoever is either uploading or putting documents in a specific spot, it's well understood and documented within policy procedures. Having foreign leases and all the different requirements and documentation requirements around that can be a significant push. So absent kind of that defined organization, documents, there can be version control issues, there can be kind of missing documents, which creates inefficiencies. Template management, all your leases have different terms, different requirements. So having it really in a matrix document of, hey, these certain leases require these types of documents, etc., helps your staff and your management manage the leases for compliance and the different requirements of the lease agreements that there may be. And how you can do that is the lease abstract. So having four leases, and we do a lot of lease audits and CAM audits. Every contract's different, and having a central consolidated report package saying, hey, here's all the leases, here's the KPIs for those leases, allows both staff and management to ensure that you're, one, compliant, you're hitting kind of the performance requirements of any of the leases. Two, insurance would be the component, and I think three, which is an added benefit, which we didn't necessarily put in here, but within here, but it's in the report body, is if you have any specific terms, you can make sure that your leases are competitive. So there could be, if you see a low rate or an amount that doesn't seem market competitive, having the lease abstract in a consolidated spot gives an easy risk assessment for whether it's someone that is familiar with the marketplace or familiar with whatever kind of the arrangement is, to say, hey, I think we can apply it, the terms are coming up, we can apply it a more competitive lease on X. So yeah, that was a lot of the data to you all, and I think the next, it says thank you, but I'm here for questions if there are any questions about the report or the presentation.
I have a few questions. So these issues really haven't changed from when you issued your report back in May of 2022, is that correct?
Correct.
Has there been any real progress made on any of these issues since you issued that report?
Yeah, so in the report body, we have a implementation plan, and you can see the steps that have been taken. One was completed. So we document in the so what we did in Appendix A, or the appendix, is we provided the current status from the airport report that was just presented to you all, which we confirmed was in alignment with where our current status was from our documentation reviews and reviews. We updated our recommendation because it's kind of a moving target when you have some progress. Some of the recommendations were either addressed or need to be modified based off kind of new decision making. And then we provided a in progress with management responses and responsible parties.
So, in looking at your report, just about every item is critical or high.
Yep.
And given the city's financial condition, it's not clear to me that there's a lot of resources around to address a lot of this. What happens if these things just remain critical and high? What happens if this doesn't come to fruition? Are we looking at additional risks?
I would say yes. I think there's compliance issues that could occur. There could be missed opportunities in terms of if you don't have good reporting, it's hard to track your success or identify issues early on. So I think some of the stuff that doesn't cost a lot of money, it just need resources to do it, to collaborate with kind of the key stakeholders. It's like a CIP planning. So I think not tracking performance, there's the normal risk you would assign with that if there's a poor performing lease or there's a situation on those, or if it's a task order, for example, if there's not timely completion of open task orders, that could result in whether it's property damage or an upset tenant. So I think all these have a financial impact as well as a compliance issue,
What's the key compliance issue?
Insurance was an example, like the insurance monitoring.
So we would be at risk of breaching our insurance requirements, and so if something happened, we could be challenged to collect the policies.
Correct. For example.
So in your lettering scheme in the report, critical and high are all reds. Is that indicative of the absolute level of risk in your assessments as to where these things stand?
I'd say yes. So I think if you just kind of take a step back, it's people. If the staff and airport management feel like they have too much on their plate to do a perfect job, I think that's a pretty high risk. With reporting, I think not having that baseline to assess performance, I think would be a high critical risk rating. And I think you have 2 software implementations going on. I think there's an opportunity to either have that go really well, or and that's if you have the right team, the right expertise that's helping manage the process. But I think there's risk not lining up the systems or setting it up in a way that you're going to be able to track performance, which I think carries risk. So I think all these areas, while they're moving target, we felt, and we worked with the airport management on this, and I think they agreed with many of these. I think it's better to classify higher critical at this point, given kind of the in-progress state, until that you get it down to a level that people are comfortable with.
In your assessment, are they going to actually be able to achieve the recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to the management response, they agreed with the recommendations. They've assigned points responsible for it, and they put target dates within there.
One of the last questions, a lot of this seems to be dependent upon the right software to leverage the skills of the staff. In your last report, software implementation was a huge issue with the group at the airport. They were trying to get off Yardi to ProGigiQ, then they decided that ProGigiQ was wrong. think it's a little write-off, something like $186,000. In your assessment of their software migration plans, are these going smoother than the Yardi ProDigiQ thing, or is it going slow, or is it? I mean, did you get to assess the progress that they're making on this?
We didn't assess it, but I think recommendation would definitely be making sure you have the right staffing levels, right expertise within those.
Right, but I mean, do they have that today?
We didn't assess that. So,
Not assessed.
yeah.
It just seems like it's just a rolling kind of risk profile because it's not really getting resolved. Okay. Are there any other questions?
Yeah. I had a couple of this.
Yes.
One, how long should it have taken from the time you did your initial study to implement the proper software?
Can you repeat that question?
How long from when you finished the study of this, how long should it have taken to implement the proper software system?
From the prior, are you asking from the prior report, how long
Yes.
should it? So system implementation is not my area of expertise, for sure.
If you were just taking a common guess,
Yeah, I
is
think,
it normally a year, 2 years, 6 months, 10 years?
so I've done 2 system implementations where I'm a super user on. It generally takes a year to 2 years for all the planning, implementation.
So are they within their time boundaries now
I think from the.
or overdue?
I think from the original assessment, which was through the, I think it's a little bit longer than my experience, but I think they're still trying to figure out the modules that work.
So then if we're still trying to figure out the modules, then you're saying we wouldn't implement, probably, wouldn't be able to implement a new system until 2025?
I don't know about that, because you can, if you have the right, and we didn't assess the team for the system
Can I
implementation.
respond to that? So the updates that I'm going to provide you, there was an update on the software Yardi commercial cafe tenant payment portal. Yeah, that's going to be rolled out on March 1st, 2024. So they have progress on that. There's also progress, and I think it might be the same software system where they're integrating with our ERP and also with our 311 system. So there is some progress on the software side. I'm not sure it's specific to what he's talking about, but there is some software.
Yeah, thank you.
So updates are coming.
This are coming, yeah, my report.
Thank you.
Other organizations that have this kind of risk profile, this scope of activity, do they all have it in-house? Do they all manage it the way the Santa Monica is managing it? Are there other options that we're not looking at?
For systems specifically?
No, this entire situation.
Whole situation. I mean, you guys do have the outsourced Aeroplex that's supporting with components of it. You can outsource it. That does. It's kind of the debate whether do you go all in house and you carry all the risk and you can't kind of go up and down based off kind of need, or do you go totally outsourced and you need someone really watching the contracts and the performance of those vendors. Generally, what I see works the best is kind of a mixture between the two. I can see you getting, with some of kind of the system implementations going on, capital improvement plan, I can see you guys getting additional support in some of those kind of key areas to get the baseline going. If you have all these new systems coming online, maybe getting like a dashboard reporting going that lines up to it. So I think staffing was a recurring theme within the interviews, but I think some of these data points, you could use third-party support if you're not getting the speed that you guys are looking for to knock it out. For example, like false procedures, you can get that done 6 to 9 months, no problem. Once you guys get the systems implemented, assuming those get implemented on the timelines that they're specifying, getting dashboard reporting, I can see you guys doing maybe a data integrity, data governance project, saying, okay, we have all this data. what do we want to do, what are we going to trust, so we get good dashboard reporting that manages performance. Lease abstracts, I think that can be done in-house. That's a huge project to go through all the leases and kind of get the key attributes you'd expect in terms of like what are the performance requirements, compliance requirements, what are the rates we're being applied. So I think you could go all in on one vendor to do most of that. Those are pretty unique things. Or you kind of figure out a partner that you could work with and tackle those. Maybe you get like a project manager to help IT. You'd have to talk with Stelios' team and say, hey, what's the right fit? But I think maybe you come up with a right-sized third-party support system so that you get these knocked out.
Do you think that the opportunity to knock these out sooner, with even, let's say, a temporary third party kind of parachuting in and figuring this out, is worth mitigating the risks you've identified here?
Speed's great. So if you get reporting faster, I think there's a ton of benefit to that. If you get all these systems online, you'll want good policy procedures. If you're using both in-house and outsourced parties, making sure everyone's doing what they need to do. So I can see there being a total benefit of saying, hey, what's realistic? We need to make sure we get this done. If you do, like for example, system implementation that doesn't go according to plan, or there are kind of gaps, that can be pretty costly. So I think maybe working with the airport staff and saying, hey, where do you need additional fire ammo for these kind of specific areas? Who are people that know how to do like capital planning, or and that might be a bigger conversation for the city. But I think they would tell you, say, we need firepower here and here, and then you can evaluate the options that kind of help support it.
When is the next check-in on progress on this item?
I can answer that question. Colleen Rosales from Moss Adams. So that would be included in the quarterly management reporting on findings, unless the city were to contract another official follow-up on the audit.
If the city were to contract, what? In other words, to get a different audit, audit firm?
If you were to put that into our contract.
And if we don't put it into your contract, is there a mechanism in the city to actually go through an update for the council progress or lack thereof in some time period? So actually, before you answer that, what would be the time period for you to update this?
Well, this one was done relatively fast. It was done kind of within 6 to 8 months of finishing the report. And that was because the airport was doing the system implementation and wanted to do it quickly. I would recommend 12 to 18 months, maybe even 2 years to get kind of that full scope, see that everything has been implemented. The airport also may want to do things more quickly. They want to make change happen really fast. So if they wanted to do it in a faster time frame, that would be okay. You're just going to see incremental progress over that time.
So, but is this saying that we may not see another update on progress on all of these critical and high risk items for another 12 to 18 months?
So the finance department does their quarterly audit findings update and shows implementation of those recommendations. If the audit committee chooses to add it to our annual internal audit work plan, a follow-up audit, we certainly can do that when we plan for the next fiscal year or the one after that.
And when does that opportunity arise?
We do our annual planning at the May meeting.
In the May meeting. Okay, thank you.
Well, we do provide you updates with all the items every quarter. So I'll make sure that I track this to make sure that we're giving you the right information. Because I do have updates for some of these items, but I'm not sure if it's the same ones that we're discussing here or they're separate ones.
It's just concerning that almost everything is critical, high risk. Okay, thank you. I have no more questions.
And just final note, most of these are getting implemented like July 2024 timeframe, specifically for the system. So I think if you want to do something like summer, that might be a good checkpoint. Or I think most all is at year end. So I think those would be kind of the windows to say, hey, for like systems, for example, that's kind of where we get to the baseline, do a check-in, and that could be us or staff to say, hey, are the systems implemented? Are they functioning? Is there a capital plan? How are you using the data, et cetera?
I just had a question for either the clerk or city attorney. to refresh my memory, once we like receive and file the report or any one per se, if we wanted to give the report or have this brought forward to council for additional discussion, how do we do that? Like if we have some concerns regarding whatever's been presented to us with the council, I'm not saying that on this report, I'm just saying in general, because there's a bunch of things that we're talking about today. What's the best way to bring that forward to council?
There's a procedure for board commissions and committees to bring things to the council, to request a report or issue a report, or it could be a 69.
Okay, so will we make that decision here, or would at a later date, or as a committee, or how would that work?
That's not on your agenda today.
No, but what if it's based on something that we're talking about today?
You could make a recommendation to report to the council, yes.
Okay.
Based on the topic today, yes.
Because there's a couple of things here, because obviously, we have some concerns about this, there may be some concerns down some of the other things that we're going to be talking about. I don't know, but I would just, because this is a lot, and it sounds like the airport may need some help. And if this is something that maybe needs to be brought to city council, in a way that maybe we can help airport staff out, but with resources or what have you, then this may be a bigger discussion. So, it may be a further discussion. So, not us. The city council needs to speak about further. I don't know.
There's another option too. The administration can always bring something as an administration.
Right. Okay. And that's another way too. But I was just wanted to be refreshed on what the procedure was.
So if this subcommittee were to want to give council an opportunity to discuss this, the only time that could be raised would be in this meeting. Is that correct? Because we're discussing this item in this meeting. Otherwise it would have to be agendized in another meeting, just so that somebody could actually bring it to the council. Is that correct?
If this committee wants to push it to the council, yes, it would have to occur at a meeting here. But any council member can put something on the agenda. That's another option too.
As a 16 item?
Yes.
But if this committee wanted to flip something to the council, it has to be an item that's being discussed in this meeting.
Right.
So
it has to be on this agenda.
It has to be on this agenda. Right. And so therefore, if it's not brought to council from this agenda, it has to be re-agendized at a future meeting so that it can then be recommended to council.
Correct. If you want to push it to the council.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
I had a follow-up question. We're concerned about the length of time that it's taking to implement suggestions from Moss Adams. My question is pretty direct. Is it a lack of staffing or a lack of leadership? Are either of those a factor?
Is your question related to just the airport or globally?
Just the airport, just this report, not globally,
Okay.
not on everything.
Yeah, I think the team's good. They know what they're talking about. I think it's a resource constraint. There's only so many hours in a day, hours in a week. They're overloaded with day-to-day.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but so what I'm hearing you infer from that is that enterprise fund is understaffed.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the part I wanted to know. Thank you.
But what you're saying is it doesn't have an awful mix of third-party support and in-house support, and if that ratio were improved, could more be done with the same amount of money?
Yeah, I think so.
So that's probably the critical takeaway. Any other? Yes.
Just a question for the city attorney regarding Councilperson Parham's question. So if there's something on this agenda that we discuss that we think should be brought to council, do we then make a motion at this meeting?
Yes,
Bring
that would be an
particular
option.
item to council.
Right.
Well, now I'm confused. Let's say there's something we're discussing here, and it's not agendized whether or not to bring it council, is that a motion to put it on the next agenda to bring it to council?
No, I think if it's a discussion item on this agenda, it would be fair within that agenda item to say we want to recommend this go to the
Oh,
council.
okay, all right,
You could do that today.
okay. Because I thought I had heard you say, no, it had to be separately agenda.
If it were not on the agenda.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions on this item? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file as stated. Do I get a second?
Second.
Actually, we're going to
Well, it's okay, you can do a voice. As it says here, you can do a voice. That didn't ring. So all in favor? Aye. All in opposed? None. Next item, the HSGP corrective action follow-up memo, and just so I don't use too many acronyms, we're talking about Human Services Grant Program. Corrective action follow-up. This is also Moss Adams. Moss Adams is already at the podium and ready to go.
The podium accepts me.
The button on the bottom?
It was okay.
There it is.
Here we go. All right. Good evening. Colleen Rosillas from Moss Adams. Another update report for you from a project that was completed last year. If you recall, 1 year ago, in February 2023, we did a significant report related to the Human Services Grant Program, really focused on the subrecipients' compliance with terms of contracts with the city, as well as technical assistance and capacity building for those grantees. That report had two major recommendations for HSGP monitoring. One was to develop systematized tools and processes to increase reporting efficiency and quality, so the city has more information at your fingertips to be able to make data-driven decisions. The other was to develop a systematic process for technical assistance and tools for grantees. Lots of grantees in the human services space, the not-for-profit space, often don't have really highly technical CFOs at their disposal, for example, to be able to provide the level of reporting and rigor that the city needs for a program this sophisticated. So if you recall, we approved this project in August and completed it relatively quickly with the goal of quickly developing corrective action plans for those grantees. So within our scope, we developed a compliance letter that was sent by the city for each subrecipient, showing what processes had been performed during the prior review, what areas of non-compliance were identified, and the goals of this engagement. We developed a template for the city of corrective action plans for every subrecipient where there were desk reviews or findings in the prior report. And then we developed recommendations for improvements of those current processes. I have a summary here of the non-compliance areas that were identified in the prior study, the number of corrective actions identified in that prior study. So our team collaborated with the city and those grant recipients to develop those corrective action plans. We wanted to make sure they were implementable and that they met the needs of the city. We anticipate each corrective action that was identified in the report to be implemented in the next year. And what will happen next? So every corrective action plan was approved by city staff. We anticipate that these will address those findings that were identified in the prior report and will also help to prevent future findings. We also wanted to note that staff is going to actively monitor those corrective actions, particularly for those entities who have received new funding from the city. So the city had a follow-up RFP process for HSGP. It was partially informed by the findings from the last study. That the city also, some entities didn't receive grants in this round that received grants prior. So you won't necessarily see a one-to-one as monitoring continues in the city's reporting. But what you will see is that everyone who is currently receiving funding from the city will go through this subrecipient monitoring process. The city actually issued a request for proposal today for ongoing third-party grantee monitoring for the HSGP program. So the selected vendor is going to monitor awards. They're going to ensure that ongoing compliance as well as just stewardship of city funds. And you should expect that that regular reporting is sent to the city manager's office and used for longer-term decision-making about the program. So with that, I'll answer your questions.
So, so you said that the city has approved the forms. Have you guys looked at the corrective action forms, and do they cover all of the items in your last year's report?
Yes. We helped the city develop those forms.
You helped the city develop those forms. Now, if I recall in the last report, it was a CPA firm that was doing audits of these, and then for cost reasons, the CPA firm was relieved of that responsibility. So is this RFP that's going out, is that basically replacing the CPA firm that used to do the audits of these?
Yes.
Is it going out to a CPA firm?
I anticipate that CPA firms will bid on it, yeah. That's basically who's in the...
Is that one of the requirements for respondents, that they be a CPA firm?
I don't know, actually. It was issued today, so I haven't read it.
It's posted on our open door website, so it's open to anyone that specializes in that field. So I can look at it and see if they require CPA or not.
What is, in your estimation, what amount of audit work is covered by what a CPA firm would do versus audits of these vendors that wouldn't require a CPA?
I don't know that being a CPA is required to do subrecipient monitoring. I will say that it includes pretty complex fiscal and programmatic data. And so within this space of third parties who do subrecipient monitoring, it's basically, all the large and mid-sized firms that do that work. I don't know if folks really do that without being part of an accounting or advisory firm.
One of the issues was, I think the people concerned, their books didn't even tie in your last report. Their accounting books just didn't tie. So something like that would require more specialized knowledge, right, to actually figure out and assess that. Is that correct?
The technical assistance that's typically provided to subrecipients under this type of a contract and the type of technical assistance we did during the first report absolutely requires that type of expertise.
So whoever is awarded this contract is going to have some capability in that. So I would imagine that the RFP is going to have. I haven't seen the RFP, so I'm assuming that's covered in the RFP.
It says all work must be completed by an independent CPA and subject to all state and federal statutes. So it's a requirement.
Great. All right. And what is the timing anticipated to bring this type of vendor on board and get them immediately started on this? And then what would be the timing to conduct audits on these items?
So the RFP closes on March 15th. And then it takes maybe a couple of months to get to review the proposals. And then maybe a couple of weeks to get a contract in place. So about three months around. And I was just wondering, based on that time, to the RFP.
So we're looking at summertime before something gets on. Right. And how long would that contract be for?
for officer.
Okay. So, I'm looking at your report, there were some rather large numbers that was kind of concerning. So, and I'm not quite sure if you can give me some time frame. So, the people concerned, based on the reconciliation, there were approximately $809,000 of grant-related expenditures that could not be reconciled between the fiscal reporting report and the general ledger. Is this a new observation, or is this simply quantification of the prior observation?
These are all observations pulled from the prior report.
Okay, so the prior report, I don't recall it having the actual numbers. So it's confusing. So the people concerned, you've got two numbers. One says 336,000. Then the other one says 809,000. So is that a total of over $1 million that we're looking at? Is that what we're looking at? That's unreconciled with the people concerned?
So there are 4 corrective actions that were identified across those 4 separate grant programs. It's closer to 1.3 million.
Can you repeat that number?
1.3 million?
Thank you.
It's over 4 programs.
Yes.
So, and are those all related to the same internal control problems that the people concerned? Are all of these, is that 1.4 million all kind of related to the same issue?
I don't know that I would necessarily characterize it as an internal control issue. I'd have to go back to the prior report to see the detail there. Ultimately, there are some really significant issues that needed to be improved in terms of grant accounting, monthly close, making sure things are tracked and monitored appropriately, and that's reflected in the corrective action plans.
I mean, the people concerned is the only one that has numbers in it that have financial issues, and the numbers are large at 1.4 million. So it sounds like so we don't know the current status of unreconciled items of the people concerned. This data is over a year old.
Yes.
And when would be the next time, if any, that this type of audit, I mean, would this new vendor that comes in, would they be going out and then updating this kind of information? Or is that, what is going to be the role of the new vendor?
Yes, so in an ongoing subrecipient grant monitoring process, you would look at the data more on a real-time basis. It's sometimes done quarterly, sometimes annually. That will be up to the city as to what frequency you want to look at. And then you're able to get closer and closer to more frequent reporting and reconciliation of information.
You looked at the forms that are going to be sent out to the vendors. Is this issue specifically addressed? So is the form that's going to go out to, for example, the people concerned, going to address these, reconciliation problems and have them provide staff with updated dispositions of not only these problems but where they're at today?
Yes, the corrective action plans are customized to each of the findings.
So each of the findings and each of the vendors?
Yes, we didn't send out a blanket to each subrecipient because they each had a different corrective action identified.
So let's say that, just so that we can all wrap our heads around, how this gets resolved. So when they come back and they let's say they return the forms that you are sending out, given these numbers here, what would be the expected, if they say it's resolved, then either these numbers, they'd say, here's the proof that we have reconciled these numbers, or they would say, we have a real problem, we actually just lost the money. I mean, is that what would be coming back from the forms that you've sent out?
So if they implement the corrective action plan, they should be reporting back to the city on the status of that implementation, and then the ongoing monitoring process would verify that. So similar to the quarterly recommendation implementation process that we have for our work with the city, the finance department reports on whether something has been implemented. We don't go in and say, we're verifying that. That's not part of our scope of work. With this contract, it is to verify what has been provided back to the city. So the city would have that information going forward.
Right, but what's been provided to the city doesn't reconcile. So what will this new vendor do in the case that, let's say, this is still an issue, this is still unreconciled? Are they going to simply tell the city, nothing's changed, this is still a problem, and it's a bigger problem, or it's a smaller problem? Or are they going to, I mean, what will the city get so that it can action something?
Technical assistance to the sub-recipients would include assistance implementing changes, providing advice, providing best practices, so that their reporting matches the standard that the city requires.
And who provides that technical assistance?
That would be the vendor, and then HSGP staff.
So the vendor's going to have to, the city's going to be relying on the vendor to help these organizations address and fix these problems.
Yeah.
So it's not just, they're not just auditing, but they're actually actively going in and assisting them.
Yes, and that's part of the RFP.
That's in the RFP?
That's in the RFP. There's also, Human Services implemented a schedule of technical assistance workshops, which are being rolled out now. So that's also the help that we can give to the grantees.
Right, I mean, this is just basic accounting, so I mean, that's not going to be just a workshop item. You know?
Right, but that's...
The workshop item will be make your books balance. Exactly, okay.
But the RFP does include that service.
All right. Are there any other questions from subcommittee members?
So I'm maybe slightly confused. So there was this 1.3 some odd million dollars that they couldn't fully identify how they used that money, where it went, and were not able to give us a report back on, we use this $400,000 to help these people in this facility, or we use this money on the street, and here is the results. In terms of going back and hiring an outside vendor, are we really attempting to identify where that money was used, or are we just washing that and moving on?
No, those are two different pieces. So
Okay.
this monitoring is...
Help me understand.
So there's a corrective action plan that has been required by the city of all of these grantees to fulfill. And so that means take these steps, prove to us that you took these steps. So during that process, that should hopefully reconcile the general ledger. We'll be able to get information on where those funds were spent and feel comfortable about revenues and expenses based on the city's grants. This process is a go-forward process related to the RFP. So looking at current year data, looking at future years, and getting on, again, that rolling basis of, are we compliant with what the city wants? What do we need to do to get compliant and create that systematic program of compliance?
But going backward, so if we heard during the audit last year that a couple of different nonprofits could not really supply full facts and figures about where their money was used, what was going on with the grant money they received. Are we ever, as part of this, I hear going forward, we're taking corrective action. Are we actually finding out where that money was used or not used? Or is as part of the existing platform from a year ago? Where are we in identifying from, let's say, people concerned where that 1.3 million went, or from, the Boys and Girls Club, why are they missing $6.10? Whatever it is, are we actually finding a way to solve the past? Maybe this question is for you, Oscar. You understand my question?
Yeah, I understand your question. Can we, maybe for the next meeting, have Human Services come and tell you how we resolve these issues? Maybe we can get you information.
I guess, were they resolved? That's the main question.
I'll confirm that information.
I mean,
but when we went over this at the council, we directed staff to address these issues. It wasn't like we just said, oh, that's nice, move along. So it's my understanding there were corrective actions being taken with regard to the observations from the previous report. Has that in fact happened?
I need to find out.
Okay. Yeah, because it wasn't like he just received and filed and said,
Yeah,
oh, that's okay. No, I mean, we actually gave affirmative direction, that's my understanding.
I'll find out.
And like every one of our reports that is approved by this committee, it goes into the validation process. So that's something that is done and checked up on. So you should get an update on that. It's, at every quarter, it's relatively early in the process, but I would assume some of them have been completed or in progress.
And to be fair, I just want to state that I don't recall, and I have last year's report here, I don't think that the actual amount of the discrepancies was actually stated. So it's the first time that we've actually seen the scope of the misstatements from people concerned, and it's 1.363, so it's almost 1.4 million.
So, yeah, and that goes back to my concern. What was the date of the meeting we discussed this?
The meeting that we had here was February 21, so it would have been in March, I guess, last March.
So, I guess my question is, why is it taking a year to resolve this? Because if it takes a year, at that point it sort of gets forgotten. And I understand increased scrutiny as we move on. That's a thumbs up to make sure we don't have that again. But we continue to give people concerned and other nonprofits more funding. And my concern is, why would we give someone more funding when they can't account for where the previous money went? That makes no sense to me.
Except we don't know that it took a year. They could have fixed it 2 days after we identified it.
Why didn't, and I would say at that point, somebody should have come back to the city council, the city manager, someone to let us know that this has been rectified.
So
my concern is, it just seems like it's in an abyss somewhere.
So here's a question. So was people concerned made aware of these issues? They were, right? Because when you guys did this report originally, you obviously had the numbers as well. Is there any requirement on, given this kind of issue, is there any requirement on the vendor themselves to, as soon as they fix it, report back to the city, or is it always up to the city to go chasing after vendors to find out what's going on? And, it's almost like it's a kind of hide the thing under a shell. I mean, is there any requirement for the vendors themselves to say, as soon as they reconcile it, they report back voluntarily to the city based upon this item? Or is everything dormant until the city goes back and pings them? In which case, it's, if the city misses a beat, these guys are home free.
That would be in the individual agreements between the grantees and the city. So that's a better question, I think, for HSGP personnel.
That would probably be something to...
And if I can add, to that, we shouldn't have to go chasing them. I think that's a real issue if we have to chase someone down, because we have so much going on in the city. No matter how many staff we have, we cannot, we're not able to check on every contract and everything, so we have to rely to the extent on.
But I think they know that. That's why they don't follow up with us.
Yeah,
No,
so is that in our, I guess this would be again for city staff, can we research to see, is that self-reporting part of the mandate of their contracts on these grants? I think that would be important to know so that we can follow up with that in the future.
I think that would be critical in basically getting you guys up to speed without, unduly burdening.
Yeah, and I'm not concerned about being the people concerned. I'm concerned about any and all.
No, that's everything.
And all grants.
That's everything. That's everything. And to the extent that issues have been identified, self-reporting should be a requirement. Okay. Any other
Well, I was just making a comment that I have special concerns, especially because the grant period, there was continual extensions. And so what should have been a 4-year was an 8-year, was a 12-year. And so, having these types of discrepancies, if you will, they should know better. They've been recipients of these grants for not 4 years, 12 years. And so, that's all I'm going to say. That's my case. And so, yeah, I'll leave it there.
I'll provide clarification.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so.
This is one of those items that I think that I want to bring back to the council to kind of keep an eye on, because it is something that I've, been very.
Would you like to cause a motion?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Phil, what do you want to? This is something that we keep having to bring up and talk about. So I don't know if we want to just wait for now, or
I would like,
wait till we get the update.
I would
from
like
HS2.
finance to come back to our city manager, and our city manager come back to us with an administrative report, and then we can determine at that point, is there a need for these procedures to be reviewed by city council. So I don't want to just willy-nilly put things on
Right,
the
of
agenda.
course. But this is something that we had serious
As long, I'm
concerns
sure
about
staff
for
has
12
heard
years.
tonight that we're very concerned about this issue. And I think, Councilmember Parra, you've been concerned about this issue. This is the first issue we wanted to tackle when you were elected. So the fact that we're 3 years in, I think is disturbing.
But can I make a comment then? I think everyone needs to remember sort of the timeline here. Yes, we did extend the grants during COVID and things like that, and because we were going on different budgetary cycles. But we also recently just voted on a whole new round of human services grant. So, and by the way, the council unanimously, just to point out, supported giving human services grant money to the people concerned. And that we had the report on these deficiencies before we made those decisions. And we gave direction to staff to work with the grant recipients to correct the actions. And, I don't know if they've been implemented or not, but I'm assuming if there had been a problem, like people concerned said, screw you, we're keeping the money, staff would have come back with us when they were wanted more human services grant money and said, we're not recommending people concerned because they haven't been working with them. So I think we should, at a minimum, wait and see what Mr. Santiago has to say about, what staff has done. But I also think to the extent, if you want to, we just did a whole new round, and those people will be subject to this new monitoring process, I'm assuming. So I just don't want to keep kind of saying 8 years ago, all this bad stuff happened. I mean, we certainly should correct it, and we should know that it was corrected. But I just, don't want to spend a lot of time sort of working ourselves up into a fury about things that we knew about, that we asked to be corrected, that maybe they were corrected, maybe they're not. We'll get that information. But remembering that that is all sort of in the past. We have a whole new round of human service grant recipients, and that's what this monitoring program is really meant to address, as I understand it. Is that correct?
That's correct. You have new contracts with some legacy grantees and some new grantees. We want to hold every single one of them accountable to the terms of those contracts. And that includes regular reporting of the right data so that the city can monitor these closely and make adjustments as needed.
Right, and we were very specific when we did this most recent round of grants, and we wanted to make sure the contracts had auditing rights and things like that, so that we were able to go in and determine if the money was being spent appropriately, if we could account for the services, that sort of thing. So I just kind of want to separate this as a update on something that happened, but we've had a lot happen since you gave us the initial report about the HS2. Thanks.
Just to follow up on that point, I do want to point out, however, that this is the first time the magnitude of the issue has been quantified. You've never had visibility into $1.4 million of problems as far as unreconciled expenditures. So the prior report from a year ago had no valuation of the size of the problem. This is the first time in this report that it's actually been quantified. So I think that sheds a different light on how things are going, and perhaps it's this subcommittee's fault for not asking for a quantification of that number when the first report came out last year, and I think that was a clear oversight on our part, or at least on my part. But now we know the scope of the problem, and so I think that is what is shedding a completely different light on the urgency to kind of address this and find out where we're at. Commissioner Barnes.
I want to look at this. I understand, Councilmember Davis, that we're doing everything we can now with the Moss Adams report, with the new implementation guidelines that we used for the grants that we just awarded. However, our residents deserve to know where the past money was used and how it was used. And that doesn't matter if it's in the past. It needs to be quantified. We need to know if whichever grantee did not use the money properly or was not able to tell us where the money went. And that has, I'm fully supportive of Moss Adams, of the new report of, yes, we voted for our grants unanimously. And I don't want to single out, and I said this a minute before you spoke, I'm not trying to single out people concerned. I'm trying to make sure that all of our grant money is fully accounted for, whether it's in the past. We know that in the future it will be done better. We understand that. That does not excuse the past.
Right, but I guess what I'm just saying is we don't know that it hasn't been accounted for because we don't know.
Right, but that's why we need to look. That's why we need to.
And look, if it's $1 or $1 million or $10 million, it's the city's money. I just think everyone's acting like this money has gone poof and it's gone and nobody knows what happens to it. And I'm not making that assumption at all. I think we need to get the report from staff that says when they went back and asked for this corrective action, what happened.
So you were supporting what I said originally?
No.
Okay.
You know, I think just this highlights the critical need in all of these contracts for a requirement that they report back to the city as soon as they've corrected identified deficiencies. I think that's what this says, because otherwise than that, you know, again, because you guys are so overloaded with everything, the time lags become, you know, insufferable. So that would be a key takeaway. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So do I have a motion to receive and file this report?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
I'll second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, internal audit work plan. Do we have?
That's me. We don't have a presentation for this one. You have a one-page status report in your packet. Page 38 in your packet, as usual. So this is not our proposed work plan. This is just our quarterly status report. Pretty short and sweet. So we completed the airport project. We completed the HSGP follow-up. We have one other project for this fiscal year, which is the Joint Dispatch Efficiency Study. We have postponed the kickoff of that, so that was originally planned for about January. After conversations with City Manager's office, we've postponed that until April. So at our next meeting, we'll provide you all with the work plan for that. Otherwise, we have our ongoing internal audit services, which have been on track. Any questions?
No, I don't think there's any questions. Do I have a motion to receive the Moss Adams report? do I have a second? We have a motion, we have a second. A voice vote, please.
I'm sorry, was that Committee Member Davis seconding the motion?
No, that was, Carl.
Sorry. And Committee Member Bush?
Yes, he seconded the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? That carries unanimously. Alrighty. Item E, presentation of the annual comprehensive financial report. ACFR, I still don't know why they changed it from CAFR. And there's a staff presentation.
Yes, so last year, if you were here, we had a fairly extensive PowerPoint presentation of the financials and how the accounting works and that sort of thing. I'm not going to do that this year. I just wanted to bring up two projects that we have going in the works. One is the popular annual financial report. So instead of having the big 170 some odd page financial statements, we're trying to reduce it down into maybe 6, 8, 10 pages of financial information that people can easily look at and pick out really what the important points are from this year's financial statements. So you see on the left-hand side, it's got some financial highlights about how our total assets exceed our total liabilities by 1.4 billion, that our net position decreased by 37 million, the general fund balance decreased by 63 million. We've got net capital assets of 1.4 billion. And then if we skip to the next page, we talk about the pension liability, about that going up 265 million. And then because in this subcommittee meeting last period, we talked more about notes receivable. We've got, and we also talked about the so-called forgivable at maturity notes receivable, which aren't reflected on the financial statements. So you can see we now show that we've got we've issued 171 million of those notes, and it's in fact reserved for that same 171 million. We've got 211 million of notes receivable that are the collectible variety. And what we also did was we reported based on who the borrower is, both the forgivable and non-forgivable types of notes. Additionally, we just had a little information on capital assets. And we also talked about our audit results from plants saw Longhard that we got an unmodified opinion and there were no disagreements with management. And the second item we're working on, and we're very close on this one, is the additional notes receivable reporting. I need to find it. So again, in the financial statement notes, and also this is a document that we're going to eventually post to the housing website. It talks about how the housing notes receivables are generated, where the sources of funds are from, also what differentiates the note that is forgiven at maturity versus a note that is collectible. And here we give detail on what's been dispersed to the various developers, and also the activity for the year by developers. So these are the collectible notes. Then, just as we used to have in the financial statements, which we now have more condensed version, we show each note and the activity separately by fund. And then we also describe each note, what activity took place, what the maximum amount of the note is, and then how much has been drawn to date. So housing has not gone over this to edit it with their comments yet, but once we get those, then we'll present this to the committee and see if that's the information that they need to see as far as transparency is concerned. And then we'll go ahead and we'll post that on the housing website, and it'll be updated every year. And now I'll introduce Ryan from our accounting firm, Lansall. Yeah, that's coming to be on the table. Also, once Ryan's done, we can address any questions.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight to kind of go over the results of the fiscal year 2023 annual financial audit. Like Randy mentioned, my name is Ryan Domino. I'm the partner with LSL who oversaw the audit. Just a little bit about the team. So obviously it's me, and then the manager who is really overseeing the day-to-day, Bradley Greenlee. He is not here tonight. So the first thing I always like to do in these presentations is talk about what is the scope of a financial audit, what are we actually here to do. And so we've been engaged by the city to perform the financial audit for June 30th, 2023 of the annual comprehensive financial report. We conduct our audits always in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. So this is really the baseline auditing standard that every audit firm, every auditor, regardless of type of organization or industry that they're in, have to follow these standards. It's kind of the bare minimum, if you will. However, because the city is a government organization, it's also subject to government auditing standards, or the yellow book, you might have heard it called, maybe. Government auditing standards is really a step up. It requires additional tests of internal control, as well as tests of compliance with laws, regulations, grant agreements, things like that. There's additional reporting that's required by government auditing standards as well. So it really is a little bit of extra stuff that goes into it that makes a government audit a little different from a non-SEC private sector audit. The whole point of why we're doing this audit is to render an opinion on the financial statements themselves. Are they reliable? Is the numbers and information and disclosures, is it accurate? Can they be used for submitting to a grantor agency or a bond covenant agreements, things like that. Two things that a financial audit is not, though, and this is a pretty common misconception, is one is I'm not here going to tell you whether or not the financial position of the city is doing better or worse over prior year. My opinion does not cover that. The only time I would ever mention in these reports that there is a operational deficiency, if you will, is if, in our opinion, we believe that there will be severe financial hardship within the next 12 months or so. So unless we see anything significant of that nature, we don't report on operational results. The other thing is an audit is not primarily a hunt for fraud. So although we're required to consider fraud, we're required to plan responses to what we consider to be fraud risks, and we're supposed to conduct procedures to identify fraud risks. We're not out there looking for fraud under every rock, so to speak. So if we were to become aware of any sort of thing, we obviously would be required to report it to the appropriate individual or group. So the scope of the engagement, in terms of what it actually looked like, we conduct our audits in 2 phases. So we do our first phase, which is interim. We did this in April of last year, and it's during this time we really examine the internal controls of the city. We look at the policies, the procedures, really the process in generating the numbers that go into the financial statements. And based on our evaluation of the controls and policies and stuff like that, we provide feedback to management if we were to identify any sort of deficiencies, those types of things. We also perform risk assessment. So this is when we take all the data we've gathered, we look at it, and we say, okay, this area is going to take a little more time than this area because of X, Y, and Z risks. An audit does not provide assurance on every single transaction that happens during the year. If that's the case, I'd still be auditing probably March of something in the previous year. So we have to really focus our audit on where we believe the risks to be. And then what we do is we plan our procedures to respond to those risks. So if we think there's an issue in cash, for example, we'll design procedures to respond to those types of risks. So after all that, we come back in late October, early November, and this is when we conducted what is really thought of as the audit. This is when we do the detailed testing of balances, transactions. We do our compliance testing with the various laws and regulations and grant agreements that the city is subject to that have a material impact on the financial statements. So if it's financial statement related compliance, we do kind of those sort of testing. If it's compliance with something non-finance related, don't ask me, I don't know. And then finally, we'll do any other procedures necessary this time to obtain our sufficient appropriate audit evidence.
Can I just ask a quick
Yes.
question? So your interim field work lasts 4 days, and your year-end field work lasts 10 days. Am I reading this correctly?
Yeah, it's about a full week for interim, and then about 2 weeks for year-end, yes.
So with a city of this complexity, is this because you're doing a lot of this remotely, remotely into the systems of the city?
Yeah, there's definite efficiencies that we have. So we are given access, read-only access to the city's financial software. So we're able to really pull a lot of the information ourselves without having time delays, requesting staff for information. Additionally, as a firm, we have been the city's auditors for a couple of years now, I think 5, 6 years. So there is a little bit of institutional knowledge and efficiencies gained each year. So that's why interim maybe the first couple of years took 2 weeks to do, but now we're down to 1 week on it. Year-end has always been about 2 weeks though. So that has been pretty much unchanged.
If I might add, remember that's just field work. That's not really completing the entire audit. There's always questions, especially after interim and also year-end. There's always continued questions going on.
Well,
There's still just testing certain portions of the audit they didn't necessarily complete during actual physical field work.
So year-end audit, that's just the field work. What's the actual scope of time? What dates would that encompass?
So we did most of the field work during, like I said, late October, early November. It really kind of wrapped up kind of through the end of the year was when we had a little bit of additional back and forth, clarification of questions that we weren't necessarily able to get during those 2 week period. And then just reviewing the financial statement drafts as they came out. So I believe our opinion letter, Randy, correct me if I'm wrong, it was in January, I think, when we issued. Okay, so we go through all of that process really to issue 2 reports. The first one is included in the annual comprehensive financial report. It's the first item in the financial section of that report. It is our opinion letter. And so, for the fiscal year June 30, 2023, we did render a modified auditor's opinion. There's 3 opinions that can be rendered. You can do an unmodified opinion, which is everything is good, in all material respects. The numbers are reliable and accurate. Modified opinion, you don't want that. That is basically saying, except for this, they're reliable. And then adverse is don't rely on anything in this document. So unmodified is really the best and highest that we're allowed to render as auditors, and that's what we issued this past year. Additionally, as required by government auditing standards, we issued the report on internal control and compliance. This is a separate letter. It's in your agenda pack. I believe it's one of the last pages. And really, this letter is the one that talks about our testing of internal controls and compliance. So if we were to come across any sort of significant deficiencies in internal control or material weaknesses in internal control, as well as any sort of non-compliance with the laws and regulations, grants, those types of things that we test, we would report it here. And I'm pleased to report it's a clean letter this year. There were no internal control deficiencies or non-compliance.
So the airport issues that we discussed earlier did not rise to the level of something that would be noted?
It did not, no. Okay, and then additionally, we issued one other letter that we call our auditor communication letter. It doesn't have a header on it or anything like that. It's also in your agenda packet. And that's really just the written summary of the audit, so to speak. It goes over a few other items here. So for example, if we had any going concern doubts, this is that severe financial hardship I mentioned earlier. We did not have any concerns about that, so we didn't comment there. We didn't identify any sort of fraud, waste, or abuse as a result of our testing, and none was brought to our attention by the various city staff that we interacted with and interviewed on the topic. We had no disagreements with management about the application of accounting principles, of which there was a new one this year. I'll talk a little more about that in a second. But as far as application of GAAP and all that stuff, we had no issues there. We had no difficulties conducting our audits. Staff was forthcoming with all the requests that we had made and provided everything we asked for in a timely manner. So that was very helpful, and we're appreciative of that. And then finally, we review estimates. So there's a number of estimates that go into a financial statement for pretty much any organization. The two biggest ones for pretty much every governmental organization is the pension liability and the other post-employment benefits liability. So these are estimated amounts. They come from an actuarial firm or CalPERS. And so we, as the auditors, we have to get some comfort that the actuary has, good data with which to create that estimate. So we audit all of the information that was provided to the actuary to make sure we can rely on what they come up with as their estimated amounts. So the big change from the prior year, we had a very significant change in accounting principle. For this past year, it's GASB, or Government Accounting Standards Board number 96. And this one really changed the accounting for subscription-based information technology arrangements. So think of it as if you have a software that you're paying a subscription for on an annual or monthly basis. The GASB now requires a liability to be put on the books for all the future payments of that subscription, and offsetting it with a intangible asset for the right to use that software, even though it's technically not a physical asset. If that makes any sense. GASB just likes adding more and more things to the financial statements and making poor Randy's life harder with no disclosures. And ultimately, the end result of this change in accounting principles, we now have a net subscription asset on the books that's valued at about $3.6 million. And there is a liability on the books for the future payments on this subscription is about $4.5 million. Last thing I always like to do in these presentations is just kind of go over a few financial highlights, very high level, just a few things that are usually of interest. But one is the general fund. So as far as general fund performance plan, it did decrease $63.5 million to an ending fund balance of $146.4 million. The unassigned amount, so this is kind of the amount that's not appropriated for anything, it's available for spending. It represents about 11% of total annual expenditures and 31% of total fund balance. The general fund's expenditures came in about $18.5 million under budget. Capital assets increased just a little bit, about 2%. About 2%, $34.5 million. Good chunk of that, like I mentioned before, about $4 million was related to those subscription assets that were added onto the books this year. Long-term debt decreased a little bit, 1%, just mainly due to the some normal debt repayments that happened during the year. The big one that I'm pretty sure everyone probably noticed, and everyone in California noticed, with CalPERS returns, was that CalPERS had a really poor year in 2022 in terms of investment returns. And due to the timing of when CalPERS issues their reports versus when the city issues the reports, from CalPERS on that pension liability, there's a little bit of a time lag. So CalPERS bad 2022 got reflected in the city's 2023 financial reports. So you'll see that the pension liability increased about $266 million thereabouts. And it's kind of back to where it was 2 years ago. And if you'll recall, last year, CalPERS' very good year got reported, and we had an unusually low pension liability. So happy days are gone, and we're back to status quo, basically. And then finally, the OPEB liability, in terms of some good news here, did decrease about $5.7 million, primarily due to additional city contributions and some changes in actuarial assumptions that happened during the year. So that is my presentation on the audit. I'm happy to take any questions.
Mark, I just had a general question. Is the city going to present the actual report, or should we be asking questions about the content of the report now?
This is the opportunity to ask those questions.
Okay, so about the content, for example, if there's questions about the management's discussion, for example, is it okay to ask those questions now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, just quickly, did you have any role in writing the or editing or reviewing or commenting on the management's discussion and analysis of the results?
Yeah, so the management's discussion and analysis is considered required supplementary information of the financial report. So we don't audit it to the same level of detail that we audit the financial statements, but we do review it and make sure that all the data in it is consistent with what is in the financial statements. We also review it just to make sure, if it went up, that the explanations that are in it are consistent with our understanding in our work papers. But as for the individual numbers and each individual changes, Randy or finance team would want to be the go-to on that.
Okay, so you just mentioned in the slide up there that CalPERS had a bad year. There's a comment in management discussion that they underperformed, not to the degree that they did in the year that's reflected in these results, but it was somewhat below the 6.8% target. So my question is that underperformance possibly lead to another significant increase as the year goes on?
So are you asking what we're going to look like going forward?
Well, I'm just asking on that comment, what should I do with that? Should I assume that the pension liability will again increase next year significantly because of
No, because we actually already have the results in for next year's financial statements, and the pension liability is going to go up $8 million. So
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. $8 million?
$8 million.
Okay, all right.
So the returns that Ryan's talking about, to put that in like numbers, it was minus 6.1%. We're expecting 6.8%. So that's like almost a 13% underperformance. In the previous year, we had 21.3% positive. So that's why essentially the pension liability got cut in half. And then basically, as Ryan said, it's kind of back to where it was before, a little bit higher than it was before. And you're just going to see that because, I was going over some numbers this afternoon, and the returns just go up and down and up and down. So that's going to cause that pension liability to bounce up and down.
And just so you know what happens is, so they measure the return on a fiscal year basis, July 1st to June 30th. So we get to June 30th this year, they'll determine what the annual rate of return is on the pension fund, and then they factor that into our financial statements 2 years down the road.
2 years down the road, exactly.
This increases, I don't know if it was actually, we were decreasing up in 2 years ago, and so we get through the
In that same discussion, I guess the city at one time used to prepay their obligation. I don't know if I'm using correct words, or prepay their obligation. In return, they get a slight discount on that obligation. But as I understand it, they didn't do it during this fiscal year because perhaps they had higher returns by investing that money someplace else. Am I stating that correctly?
That's correct. So normally what happens if there's two components, sorry to get into this stuff, but there's basically two components of the pension payments that we make. There's what's called the normal cost. That's the cost that everybody that's a current employee incurs for their year of service. And there's the unfunded liabilities, which is that $500 million you're seeing on the balance sheet. So there's a payment against that unfunded liability. They amortize over 20 years or so. And that payment is basically the UAL payment, the unfunded actuarial liability payment. So that you can pay in advance. And you will get basically 1/2 of the 6.8% normal expected return as a discount for making that payment in advance. But with interest rates as they are nowadays, I think the 6 month T-bill rate is 5%. So we're actually going to get, by leaving this money in the bank, going to get paid more interest in those earnings than the discount that we would have earned by making the advance payment to CalPERS.
Okay, and that's what I was just wanted to make sure I understood this, because I think there might be a third component. Is the third component possibly the interest on the unfunded liability, or does the unfunded liability already include the interest on it? I noticed in various pages, I got all the pages written down, there was this line item that said interest on the liability.
You're probably looking at the pension note that has sort of like the beginning balance, the interest incurred, and then contributions from the city, that sort of thing.
Right.
Yes, so that's the interest on the total liability. So I think our total liability is like over $1 billion. So that's at 6.8% times that $1 billion.
Okay, but that total liability includes the normal cost each year plus the unfunded liability.
Well, in theory, all things working perfectly, your normal cost covers that year's expense, and would if CalPERS was able to hit that 6.8% mark, it would never become part of the unfunded liability. But because there's situations where either there's a change in assumption, they reduce the expected rate of return, that causes the unfunded liability to get bigger. But normally, the normal cost does not become part of the unfunded liability.
When you say the normal cost, what you're saying is the interest expense would not be added to the unfunded liability.
The normal cost, again, is the cost of the CalPERS expense for current employees' current year of service. So yes, if the unfunded liability we're amortizing and we actually hit the 6.8%, then yes, none of the interest would be on the normal cost, correct.
I'm sorry, I have a credit card. If I make only the minimum payment and not the entire balance,
right.
At the end of the year, I'm going to be having a bigger balance because I'm going to be charging interest on what I didn't pay. Is that the same thing with respect to pension, or does it work differently?
No, because the interest rate goes up or down, or the contribution goes up or down depending on what the previous returns were. So in your credit card, it's a fixed rate. And the pension, it's really kind of a quasi-variable rate. So it's not going to be that same rate going all along, because how much you, how to describe this? The investment returns are what partially reduces the unfunded liability. So if the returns are less than what's expected, it's not going to reduce it's not going to amortize the unfunded liability like we think it's going to. If it's more than that, it's going to amortize it more. So that's why, again, you see that rolling kind of up and down movement of the unfunded liability.
And I'll actually add to that as well. The other piece of it is, unlike your credit card payment, with the pension liability, it really is subject to actuarial estimates. So as people live longer, they're healthier, they retire earlier, something along those lines, or later, but still the gap between retirement and mortality increases, the liability goes up. So there's a component there that's not just the financial piece of it, there's also the human aspect of when the actuary is estimating that all these retirees are gonna drop off and that type of thing, I mean, lack of better words.
And also retirement age.
Yes.
Just, Jeff, I asked one question. So, is it correct that, I read somewhere, is it correct that last year the discount rate / rate of return for CalPERS was 7.15%? This year it's 6.68%, is that correct? Is CalPERS, no, I don't, if I read somewhere, this is not the last time they're going to drop, they're guiding towards a much lower target rate of return, right? Do you know what that ultimate target rate of return is?
I would have to look it up, I don't know it off the top of my head, but just to some context, the original rate of return that they estimated was like 7.5%.
Correct.
They were getting nowhere near that, so it went down to 7.15.
They had an 8%.
Yeah, 8% I think the first year.
8.15, yes.
I don't quote me on this. I want to say 6.5% is where they're moving towards, but I would have to look it up to give you a firm answer.
So was there is when you have a year that has high returns, like 21% that was cited, they automatically build what they pay down so that they will reduce the rate of return at that moment. So they have a positive trend of buying down when the years are good.
Yeah,
right.
so
next year's 504 million, is that calculated at 6.68% or at a lower rate?
6.8%.
So has there been an estimate done as to what the city's liability would look like at the target rate at some point? I mean, because there's a couple of things, right? There's more people retiring. There's going to be the actual issues you just gave up, plus the fact that they're dropping the rate. And I didn't quantify the downside estimate. Last year I did it. One percentage point down was brought the total liability up to something like 800 million, unfunded liabilities to something like 800 million.
It's actually in the notes of the financial statements.
No, that's just that I didn't quantify.
Okay.
So, because you have to add up the three, miscellaneous, police and fire. So I would imagine, so that would have added roughly, around $300 million in the unfunded liability at that 1%, right? So we're talking about maybe maybe another $100 million by the time they settle down to 6.5%, something in that order of magnitude, on top of, without any other changes, without any other actuarial changes, on top of the 504. So that's going to be something like, when they're done, with no other changes, over $600 million, right? Okay. And just for context, in 2005, the unfunded liability was 43% of the general fund. This year, it's 115% of the general fund. And obviously, if it goes up another $100 million or something, the general fund is not increasing by those amounts. I mean, that's just a kind of order of magnitude as to what we're looking at.
You have to be kind of careful comparing. There was a change in how CalPERS calculated the unfunded liability. So previous to, I believe, this is off the top of my head, I believe 2013. 15? Thank you. The CalPERS used what was called the actuarial value of the portfolio to determine the unfunded liability. So there's an actuarial amount which is based on back then, probably 7.75%. That amount carried forward. It ignored the true market value of the portfolio. So there's a difference between the calculated amount back from 2005 to 2015 going forward. 2015 going forward, we're looking at the true market value of the assets, which more than likely was lower. So you'd have to go back and find out what the market value of the assets were back in 2005 to determine what the unfunded liability was.
Okay, so
And then, but then,
at 2015, then, just to use that number, you were at roughly 100% of the general fund in 2015, so you're at 115% now. So again, what that says is that this is growing faster than your general fund is growing, your general fund budget. That's all it's saying.
right.
So how does this whole discussion translate into cash? There's a statement elsewhere in these documents that says the general fund balance is the most important measure of the city's financial health.
Right.
And then off to the side, we have these huge numbers that are going up and down with markets and interest rates. At what point does this convert to either cash coming in or cash coming out? Or how do I see that connection?
Okay, so every year we have to make the actuarially determined contribution. And the portion of that, again, is the amortization of the unfunded liability, and the other portion is the normal cost. That's the actual cash going out. So it's budgeted every year, so it's accounted for.
So if it goes up, as Mark said, he said 600 billion, some percentage of 600 billion is higher than some percentage of 400 billion, so it would just be additional cash.
Correct.
Coming out of the.
Are you talking, Jeff, are you talking about the total balance? Is that what you're talking
I
about?
was trying to link up this obligation, if you will, and how does it convert to an annual cash flow? Meaning, as that balance goes up, how does that affect the general fund? And what I hear them saying is that there's some percentage of that unfunded liability, whatever that unfunded liability is, and some percentage of that will appear as cash flow.
Well, it's their minimum funding requirement that appears in the cash flow.
Right.
That's not related to, correct me if I'm wrong, your annual payments are not related to the size of the unfunded liability. They're simply related to your current employee base and CalPERS calculations on that, right?
Good, that's what
No, there's two components of the actuarially determined contribution. A portion of it is the normal cost, what everybody in the current year is earning.
Right.
And it's also amortization of the unfunded liability, which is typically, right now it's over 20 years. Let's use 20 years.
Okay, that was my point.
So yes,
So
you are.
it's amortizing the unfunded liability. Does that amortization component reset every year based on the new unfunded liability amount?
Yes.
What
So for example, from 2 years ago, there was a loss, right? So that loss then increases our unfunded liability. So if you go into a CalPERS actuary evaluation report, you'll see how we have one component of our cash flow every year that's our normal cost, and then another component that's our unfunded liability. So the cash flow component is when they have less than a 6.8% return, that adds to our unfunded liability. That will increase our annual payment out to CalPERS. So that's how you see it translate into a cash flow impact.
You're basically paying one-eighth of this bigger number than you might have been paying a couple of years ago when the unfunded liability was lower.
You're paying whatever additional amount results from the investment return being less than 6.8%.
But at the same time, that's an amortization over 20 years. That's assuming that your unfunded liability doesn't change over 20 years, in which case you would be paying it off.
As Dave is saying, or I'm sorry, city manager is saying, that each year, either investment greater than or less than the expected amount, that amount is another layer that then gets amortized over 20 years. Each year subsequent to that, there's another layer added. And it's not only investment returns, but it's also some of the assumption returns, or the experience returns rather. So as Ryan was saying, is if people start retiring later, then that also gets entered into.
But do any of these layers relate to the total unfunded amount that you have?
Yes.
Or is it just a calculation for that year's returns plus or minus?
Correct.
So it doesn't relate to the unfunded total?
But the unfunded total is affected by that underperformance in the market.
No, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But it does, so if you were to look at, it does relate. So I want to be clear. So when you look at, if you look at evaluation report for Cal, what we see is, and this goes back to, I think it was like during the Great Recession that Ackerman made, and then like 2013, they completely reset our pension payments. there is a moment in time once everyone passes away and we're in the new, everyone's in the new system. We pay down our unfunded liabilities. So they do foresee a time when all of it will be paid down. And that's when you'll see, like, I don't know, it's like 30 years out there, where you see like a massive reduction in the contribution.
That's 30 years from now.
Correct.
So what happens, so in 30 years, if this continues to increase, right, we know that it's gonna add like another 100 million just from the drop in the returns. How do you look at that? That's the one thing, it's like, is the entire idea that we just wait 30 years and it's gonna go away? Is that how you look at this, or is it just something like, yes, we know it's there, we don't have a plan yet, but we know it's there? How is this unfunded balance viewed?
So, for example, next Tuesday, we'll do a 5-year forecast for the city council, and that 5-year forecast accounts for what CalPERS is telling us we have to pay over the next 5 years. And that's rolling, right? So every year we update our 5-year forecast. We're always accounting for changes in what our payment structure has to be. So it's always built into our budget, and we're always anticipating what the increase or decreased payments are going to look like. So we're always factoring into our budget.
Well, yeah, that's your annual payments, but I'm just looking at these unfunded balances, which this year is 497 million, right? Last year was 231 million, but then the year before that was 481 million. Next year it's going to be 504 million. I mean, it's that balance. How do you do that balance?
So CalPERS gives us a projection of our long-term payments, and so we factor all that into our budgeting. So it's factored to get paid off.
We get a valuation for 5 years of how much our payments are, and then every year we get that and it's updated. So
what you're saying is you're banking on, through the CalPERS payment process, over 30 years, the unfunded balance gets paid off. That's how you're viewing the unfunded pension liability.
So I think in 2013, when CalPERS adopted the Pension Reform Act, I mean, they understood that the current system was untenable, and so they had to come up with basically provisions to the pension system that allowed it to be sustainable. So that's why you don't have the old formulas anymore. You only have the new formulas going forward. So they've taken a hard look at this to ensure that and that's why they put on every jurisdiction that needs to increase payments, is because they have to keep the system solvent. And so there is an anticipation and projection that as folks enter into the new pension formula over time, and we continue to meet our obligations, we will get a much more sustainable.
So the way if you were looking at this on a graph, you're saying is it's going to get worse before it gets better, but then over that hump, it actually eventually goes to zero.
It doesn't go to zero because we're always going to have obligations as long as we have a pension system.
No, I'm talking about
But
unfunded.
over the next defined time period, I mean, I've seen the chart that CalPERS presents, it does get worse.
That's what I'm saying, it gets worse.
They're very clear about that.
It gets worse from an unfunded perspective.
No, it gets worse in terms of the payments we have to make to
Right.
into the unfunded.
Yeah, but
That's because the unfunded piece got bigger, because you're amortizing
right.
a bigger and bigger balance.
But again, what I'm saying though is that at some point in time, the unfunded amount, what you're saying is the unfunded amount goes away. Over 30 years, it goes to zero. Your payments are much larger. Your cash flow out the door is much larger. But it basically results in 30 years, the unfunded portion going away. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think it's fair to say that unfunded would ever go away.
The payments are going to, city manager points out that with PEPRA, normal cost is much lower because the retirement age is higher and the benefit is smaller. So probably, it's like the charts I've seen, it's next 5 to 10 years, how much we're going to have to pay is going to go up, and then it's going to drop dramatically. Right from when PEPRA was implemented till now, there's now 50% PEPRA, a little over 50% PEPRA people, and a little less than 50% so-called classic people that really where the unfunded liability relates to. So eventually all the classic people will retire and the unfunded liability will be paid off. and the amount that you're gonna pay for Pepper people is gonna be less than had Pepper not been implemented.
But will the unfunded, and it's, after it hits its peak, will the unfunded balance decline?
Yes.
So, yeah, so according to our valuation, just looking at our miscellaneous employees, by 2043, the unfunded liability will be paid out.
Can I ask a question here? I mean, at the end of the day, we don't control most of this.
No.
CalPERS says, this is what you owe us. So as long as we give the projections that say in the coming years, this is what you're going to owe us, we budget for it. And yes, it can have a negative impact on the city because it's less money available for the general fund or to do any fun things we want to do. But at the end of the day, there's nothing we can do to control the amount of the unfunded liability except doing the prepayment, which we've now determined doesn't make sense in this particular interest rate environment. So I guess I'm sort of curious as to why we're all swirling around this, because there's not a lot we can do about it. This is all CalPERS saying, this is what you owe us, pay it to us. It's
Right.
like the IRS.
It's
How
more of
much
a,
did you make? Send it to us.
right, it's a cash flow issue, not a balance sheet reporting issue.
Right.
And truthfully, just like having lived through, I mean, the policy changes that the state put into place in 2013 and the funding changes that CalPERS has now put in place has a significant impact on operations. But from what they elaborate and what they, showed all of us shows the system will be much more sustainable as we get to the decision. I mean, they made a lot of bad assumptions going back to pre-2013 that definitely impacted the system, but they feel a lot more confident in terms of the changes that they made and the way that they are working with municipalities now.
No, and I appreciate that. I mean, and to answer your point, Subcommittee Member Davis, the point here is that everyone is looking at a massive unfunded liability and nobody knows how to place it in the context of the city's financial situation. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to understand what that how that balance gets taken care of. Is that ultimately a city responsibility or is that a CalPERS responsibility? And what we're hearing this evening is that it's a CalPERS responsibility and that as long as the city doesn't fall off the face of the earth or as long as the city doesn't decide to go to a 401k plan, which would be another almost falling off the face of the earth event, that CalPERS has determined that the unfunded situation will get resolved in 2043. So we're looking at let's say 2050. So several decades out is how the situation apparently is going to get resolved, which
and it's just, when you look at the valuation, when you talk about going to a 401k plan, you have to remember that then if you get out of the system, CalPERS will make you pay at a very...
Well, they're going to make you pay twice your liability.
Yeah,
right.
very conservative.
Right, which is why you can't afford to do that. I get that.
Well, I mean, even when there have been cities that have, for all intents and purposes, fallen off the face of the earth, and that's why there's CalPERS, because then they get their people who worked for that city get their pensions paid by CalPERS. It's not like the private sector where if you go bankrupt, there goes your retirement. If a city goes bankrupt, the city of San Bernardino went bankrupt, and there were also a couple of cities up in north, I can't remember their names. Yeah, but there was also a few cities up north that actually disappeared, they disincorporated. And it wasn't like they said, now we don't have pension liability. They had to pay whatever assets they had into CalPERS, and CalPERS paid whatever was owed to their employees under their pension. So, I mean, I don't, right, I mean, we all understand that. I think we're all scared by the term unfunded liability, and in the private sector, it has a very different meaning because it's a big debt hanging over a for-profit corporation. But here, there's just nothing we can do about it. It's not like we can say, well, what financial steps can we take to reduce that unfunded, except for we did try prepaying it, but now that doesn't make sense. So other than that, I think all we have to do is accept that we're going to see big numbers and they're going to continue to grow until at some point they're not going to grow and then they're going to go down. And I won't be here for that, but whoever is here can celebrate and throw a party.
Well, I think there's prepayment means two things. It means paying some money that you would have paid over the course of the year at the first of the year. But it also meant something else in 2019 when there was a, I don't know if it was a commission or committee.
It was
that
additional
brought together and looked at buying down the unfunded liability. And so that's my question for that piece of prepayment, if you will, does that have some benefit? I mean, does reducing the unfunded liability make sense so that we're not pulling a large number out of the general fund? I mean, we just heard that we're amortizing this unfunded liability, which is a big number now, which means 20% of it for 20 years, 1/20th of a big number is still a meaningful number. It's coming out of the general fund. Does it make sense to try to buy down that unfunded liability so we're not amortizing a large number each year?
We did start an accelerated payment plan in 2019. We paid $9.3 million. We paused it because we needed to restore services.
Right, I mean, this unfunded liability of $497 million reflects $88.1 million of prepayments. That's net prepayments. Yeah.
And I think to be, in an ideal world, we would continue with the prepayment regime, but also in a world where we have more flexibility fiscally than we have today.
So, if you don't do the prepayments, is what you're saying that your CalPERS minimum payment that they're calculating and providing you is higher than it would otherwise be if you were prepaying?
I want to make sure there's two words, prepayment and there's paid out. So prepayments we're not doing economically, doesn't make sense.
In other words, prepayments reduce your unfunded liability. Would that then translate into lower annual payments to CalPERS?
Our unfunded liability will go down.
Okay, so let's, how I think of it is prepayment, we're prepaying the amortization of the unfunded liability for that year. Additional payment is we're making an additional payment
Right.
against the unfunded
Additional
liability.
payment
So let's,
is
so let's talk about additional payments. So when you make an additional payment, and remember we have all those lines of amortization that we have, you can make a determination of what line of amortization you want to pay it against. Depending on what line of amortization you pay it against, it either will maximize reduction in your next year's, or actually 2 years from now, contribution, or you can pay it against the line item that will give you the most interest expense savings. But that's going to be amortized way in the future. In the past, when we've made these additional payments, we paid it against that line item that gave us the biggest reduction in the subsequent year. But it also didn't pay as much, we didn't save as much interest as we could have if we paid this other line item. So,
go ahead.
Sorry.
The answer to your question is yes. So for example, just looking at our miscellaneous plan, if we pay down under the current amortization schedule, the total amount we pay is about $414 million over, to 2043. So for example, for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024, the payment we have to make is $25.6 million for unfunded liability. If we agreed to pay an amortization period of 10 years, so we could come up with another $11 million to pay about $36.5 million per year over 10 years, you would save interest payments of $48.8 million. But we would have to come up on an annual basis of additional cash flow in 24 of about $11 million. And then it scales down over time, it goes up over time, it just depends on the year.
Is that $48 million the sum of interest over 10 years, or is that a net present value calculation?
They don't clarify in the schedule here. I don't think it's a net present value. I think it's just raw interest over the time frame. It doesn't clarify that. I don't think it's a net present value calculation.
So, has the council ever been given a presentation on how this works and what they're looking at going forward?
So I know before I got here, there was a whole pension work group.
Right, but the output of that work group did not have CalPERS' new sustainable plan embedded in it. It did not have the. You're looking at 2043. It did didn't discuss, decades out. So at the end of the day, has anybody seen, what this looks like in the future? So that everyone is kind of mentally prepared for how to think about when they're going to, what the city is going to be looking at.
Well, I don't know I wasn't around. But
No, when we made the decision to start, because that was, the council who gave direction to start prepaying, paying down the unfunded liability. We had a presentation about how that financially worked and how it would pay out over time and things like that.
If I remember correctly, the pension committee came up with amortizing over 13 years.
So that's all changed now with CalPERS being more prudent,
No, this would
No, this was after
yours.
CalPERS, this was after 2015.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, there was a pension subcommittee, and then there was, and they had, I was not on it, but there was a pension subcommittee that did a whole analysis with the financial department, and then they came and presented, because that was direction that had to come from city council to make that decision, to allocate a certain percentage of the budget to the prepayment.
And I think it was a combination of council people and also residents.
It was council people, residents, I think there were actually a couple of financial consultants or, local, and
That could
maybe
very
the
well be.
residents were financial people, but it was about 10 people, I think.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, their suggestion was to start amortizing over, make additional payments so that as if we were amortizing over 13 years.
Right.
So would it make sense to have a vote, kind of thinking back to a discussion we led very early on in this meeting, a motion here to request that somebody come in front of council and lay out the impact of resuming these payments? I mean, maybe it's not enough to make a difference, maybe we have better uses for the money, but at least it addresses a concern that you have a very big obligation, or that something that's become very, very big and does in fact have an impact on the general fund. So I guess what I'm suggesting is, could we consider a motion that asks the finance group to come back and look at a couple of different scenarios to make a supplemental contribution against that unfunded liability, such that it would bring some benefit back to the city?
Do we have any money to do that? I mean, that's the big question.
It depends on what the reward is, right? If the reward is big enough, there'll be money.
I mean,
If it's not big enough, then.
If we were to do a 10-year payment schedule, it depends on the year, but in the initial years, having complement and after 10, then we'd have to come back and council with some form of budget reduction to generate the cash.
I mean, it might be, over the long term, yes, you get a longer payback, but if we have to make $11 million in service cuts in the next fiscal year.
And I would say, Jeff, this is not unique to Santa Monica. I work for the city of Culver City, and it's the same exact situation there in terms of unpaid liability of the CalPERS as well. So,
I mean, it could be something, I suspect, that, not to overburden the budget discussions, not the ones that are coming up at the next meeting, but as we look at the, do the budget workshops in May, maybe that's something that, staff could discuss with council, lay out and say, here's what we were doing, here's why the decision was made to stop doing it. If you wanted to go back to doing it, you could, here would be the long-term benefits, but you would have to make these immediate budget cuts to do that. I mean, I think that's relatively straightforward, famous last words.
Well, you're going to get some of that 10 million back because there won't be as much money leaving the general fund in year one.
Get it back in the future, so we have to still generate the cash
Something-
today.
Something not wrong.
Let me put this in really straight terms. We don't have the excess in our budget that we had in 2019 and before. So when Councilmember Davis says you want to make cuts to services, which we haven't fully restored yet, that's the issue. So I would say if we were looking at 2027, 2028, right, as we fully restore our treasury, then I think it's an excellent time to bring this up again and be able to say, hey, let's implement it. Your idea is sound, but the problem we face this year and for the next couple of years is still trying to recover based upon the outside factors that have impacted our budgetary process. So everything you're saying is good, but we would have to, to put this in stark terms, our libraries are not 100% open yet, right? We need more funding for public safety. We need more funding for programs in our city that are essential, that in many cases were cut because of COVID, because of the other things that have impacted us. And we have more still to come. So I would agree with you that it's a good idea, and the city council did manage to pay down some of this. But it's kind of like a house mortgage. I mean, you're not really, I think how it was described to me once is we're not really paying this off. And it doesn't impact our bottom line except for that the additional amount of money each year. But that amount of money is negligible versus our expenses and the overall financial health of the city. So I'd say in a couple of years, yeah, it's a great idea, but we have to get back to a real sound footing first.
I'll defer to the chair in terms of what you want to do with this issue.
I
By
think
this issue, I'm referring to the pension liability. I do have a few more questions, but they're not related to pension.
so. Before the timer, I'd like to get another issue in. What I would like to suggest to help us all wrap our heads around this is there's another agenda item before we adjourn this meeting, and I think I want to wrap part of this discussion into that agenda item, so that we have another crack at the issue in the upcoming meeting. And I think that may be a way for us to discuss this with a bit more hard data in front of us, and then at that point we could probably make reconsider how we want to move forward. Okay, does that work?
Yeah, that's fine with me. I have just a few more questions on non-pension related.
I know. So I have one as well. I'd like to get that before we kind of. So, notes receivable. I'm completely confused about what was being proposed at the beginning of this discussion. As far as we have the ACFR that's published on a almost statutory time frame. It's basically it's audited, all the schedules work together. What exactly was being proposed with this summary document from a timing, distribution, relationship to financials perspective? Can you just describe that in a bit more detail?
Sure. We want to put what's required by GAAP in the actual financial statements. And what's required by GAAP is that summary note in the notes receivable note.
Right.
So it's just by fund, additions, beginning balance, additions, deletions, ending balance.
Mm-hmm.
So to give more transparency to who's borrowing, who the borrowers are, how much they borrowed, their activity for the year, describing each individual note in great detail of how much was approved in the loan in the beginning and how much has been dispersed to date. All that would be similar to that sample document I put up there with your approval. Then that would be posted to the housing website because they have a note section of the housing website that talks about notes receivable and housing loans.
Right, but someone who's looking at the financial statements, so are you suggesting that the supplemental information that's in the financial statements now also gets deleted?
Yes, it'll live on the housing website.
Okay, so This is simply a printout of the existing financial statements. So this is, the reason I'm kind of focused on the notes is that they represent the largest single set of transactions with a third party with the city. What's on the financial statements is $200 million. There's another we saw $171 million that has also been dispersed, but because of the accounting rules, don't show up on the financial statements. So we're talking about very material amounts of money. What I just handed out is what the current financial statements, this is how they currently read. And so the first page is on page 23 of the financial statements, and that's the so basically that is the updated note to the financial statements for 2023.
Right.
And I think it was a much better discussion than what we saw in 2022. As far as the requirements or the accounting policies for the notes themselves. It says during FY 2023, city dispersed $195,000. What does not say is that the city has previously dispersed $171 million that has also fallen under these types of loan agreements. So when you go to the housing website, this is a link to the housing website, trust funds, but I don't think this link is operational just yet.
Right.
So then the next page is the current table, right, which is your 5 lines, which is the different funds and the increases and decreases, and then the balance. And then page 1, and that's page 40, numbered page 40. The numbered page 142 is the narrative on all of these notes, right? So that's what the current financial statements looks like today. So I won't distribute last year's, but I'm going to distribute what it would look like this year had last year's format actually been maintained. And there's a reason for this. Trust me.
These are the same documents.
This is not the same document. So as the reader of a financial statement with a robust supplementary section, and I think that's one of the reasons the city gets its awards from when it publishes its financial statements, is because of the robust supplemental disclosure that it provides. And so one of the things is that what I've done is I've combined, and what I just handed out, I just combined the updated note that you guys provided with the updated table that you provided, and then what the table would look like this year with the changes by the notes. And then the notes, as you can see, that there's references to then the narrative that's in back. Now, if in fact, in putting together this schedule, it turns out that, there's the summary table, there's one amount that actually doesn't tie to anything in here. And so it doesn't tie to the narrative. And so one of the things I'm concerned about is, as we start splitting the information up in different places, part of it goes to the housing website, part of it is here, part of it is, all of a sudden, like I said, one of the amounts, there's a $40,000 amount that it's small, but again, the fact that it doesn't tie to the updated schedule is an indication that, that there's a self-policing kind of process if you have the last year's style table in your financial statements, and if you keep rolling that forward versus a highly summarized version that actually is, you can't, in the financial statements, can't tie it to the notes. And again, we're talking about the most material third-party transactions the city is engaged with. So it seems to me difficult to understand how splitting the information up, and at the end of the day, there's no requirement, or maybe you can inform me. There's no requirement to update a table on the housing website. I mean, one year, if everyone's really busy, we may not get to update it on that year, but we'll try and update it later on in that year, right? And so my concern is that there will be actually nothing. There's a risk that there's nothing that actually supports a highly summarized table like we're showing this year to any reader of the financial statements that's going to sit there and say, oh, okay, I understand what that is. So in 2022, we had that level of detail on the table, which is what I've handed out here, although I think these two probably should actually tie, versus having them all in the financial statements, all of them tying, all of them issued at the same time, so that the reader has a complete, unobstructed view as to what's happening in the financial statements. So, and I believe that was the direction that was provided by the council, I think back in April, when the audit subcommittee's motion actually went forward to the council and was approved by the council. So, and I know, and one of the problems is everyone's going to sit there and say, well, obviously we're going to update the table in the housing website. Obviously we're going to do that. But things get crazy, things get busy, things get, and there's actually no requirement to do that. And so there is a non-trivial risk that, at some point, these things just don't tie, they're not updated, and all we're left with is an extraordinarily summarized table that actually doesn't provide a whole lot of information. Especially, as I said, these are the most material third-party transactions the city engages in. So that's my key, in looking at all of this, that's one of my key concerns. And I love the table. I love this new table that you did. I think that table belongs in the financial statements, along with reinstatement of the FY22 table, which is that table, and maintenance of the notes. And as I said, without that table, even the staff doesn't have a self-checking mechanism to make sure that the notes that have been put together actually tie to the table. And this year, a small number was off, but the discipline of having the full table ensures that everything is very tight. Perhaps you want to respond to that.
Sure. First thing is, there's other things that we've paid more money on to than these loans. First of all, capital projects. We don't list out that we paid morally X dollars or other vendors Y dollars or for all the capital projects, because you're talking about from inception to a very long period that these loans made over. And then we also paid CalPERS more than what we paid here. But, and this is my decision, I'll take responsibility for it. I wanted to put in the statements what's gap and what would get us a GFOA award. And I agree with you, this stuff is great. So let's not put an extra 9 pages of information that's not required by GAAP or that will prevent us from getting the GFOA award. When you started talking about the loans that are forgivable upon maturity, I said, yeah, you're right, we should probably know who these loans are made to. So we put that information in there. And then we don't have this in the statements. We summarize here where we take, these are the collectible loans. The majority of the collectible loans, again, made to community park, but we also show the activity that's occurring during the year by borrower. So I thought, well, that's kind of a good thing. And this was based on discussions with you. And then we have that by note, the beginning balances increases, decreases. And then we go ahead and we describe each individual note. It's got the property address, who it was loaned to, what the original loan amount is, and then what the balance at the end of the year is.
Yeah, I mean, this has been in the financial statements for years.
But it wasn't required by GAAP.
No, but it was in the financial statements for years.
Right. And the main uses of the financial statements are really going to be the rating agencies. And I don't think, you know, unfortunately, everybody's new here, but I don't think during surveillance, they made any comment about the housing loans.
Well, they may not have made comments about the housing loans, but again, this is one of the most material disbursements the city is engaged with.
Agreed. And but again, that's over time, many, many years, if not decades.
Right,
And
but at the same time, yeah, but at the same
information.
time, most of these are forgivable. With under certain requirements, a lot of them are forgivable. So unlike a normal recourse loan, that really is not what we're looking at.
Well, the recourse, so on a recourse loan, usually it's if you fail to pay, then they take the property. In this case, we're tying up those properties to be low moderate income housing, to be affordable housing.
Correct.
If they fail to maintain those properties as affordable housing, we can collect on the loan.
No, I get that, but over time, if they maintain everything, the loan is forgiven.
In maturity, yes.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And so that's a feature that is not, you know, that's a feature that is not normal in any kind of private enterprise. And the city, to its credit, you know, I mean, that's why you guys got the award from was it from not HCD but from no, it was from HCD. You got the award for, you know, one of the most pro-housing cities in the state, and I think that it's a great thing. And this is how that happens. But at the same time, I think we all need visibility on that. It's just something that, again, I'm concerned that if it gets shuffled off the financial statements, and what we're talking about is this stuff has already been in the financial statements. We're talking about maybe adding a table or two to this, and that would fully satisfy the direction from council to basically make the disclosure a little bit more robust. I was a little surprised that the request for a little bit more disclosure ended up in having almost everything taken out of the financial statements.
I would say everything. And again, this part was added explaining the housing loans. And again, we got the award without this. Our auditor signed off and gave us an unmodified opinion without that information.
I get that. That's not an
Right,
issue.
so,
That's not an issue.
and then the only thing that is different is this shows detail by note, whereas in the note now, it just summarizes by fund.
Exactly.
So that's the only thing that's missing.
No, because you said that once this is implemented, all the narrative on the notes also is going to be eliminated.
Next year.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Right, but we're talking about this year. You said, so.
Well, yes.
So I'm just trying to put just what the requirement for GAP is and to get the GFOA award in the financial
Well,
statement.
there's probably other information in here in your supplemental disclosures that is not necessary, and you can still get your GFOA report.
Like,
Mark, so what you recommend is for us to continue to provide that table?
Yeah, that is, I thought that the additional table that you guys came up with was fantastic. I thought the other thing, there's two new tables you came up with. I thought they were both fantastic. I thought to me that's it. That covers everything that we ever need to know about this, and it's all in one place, right? In the financial statements, and it adds maybe a page, right? And so but basically, a long-term plan of taking that out, taking the notes out, putting them somewhere else that may or may not get updated over time, doesn't quite, in my mind, jive with kind of where we were going, what the council's direction was.
Transparency.
You know, I mean, that's just where I'm coming out of it.
I get that. One thing, and I had discussed with you before, I'm trying to simplify the financial statements because at some point in time, I'm not going to be here. And so when I pass this along, I'm trying to make sure that someone has the ability to kind of reproduce all this stuff fairly simply. The second thing is, we have been for the however many years late on filing the financial statements. They're supposed to be issued by December 31st. We get an extension for the GFOA award for a month. In fact, I think there was one time we actually had to go on to a second month because the statements keep on getting more and more complex. Not this, but we have GASB 87, which is the leases, and GASB 96. Those take one person almost the entire time they're working on the financial statements just to do those two GASB implementations. And for 96, what Ryan's saying is $1 million difference. So we're doing like 2 months of work for $1 million proportion difference.
No, I completely understand.
What I'm trying to do is just simplify it enough.
I completely understand that, but one of the things I take into consideration when I hear that point is that all of this has to be done anyways in someone's job to basically make sure that all the numbers tie up. I mean, I recreated this table myself from all the narrative in about an hour and a half. So, and so...
You're hired!
There you go. I did. So, but all I'm saying is this has to be maintained regardless. This is not new. This is not, and because that's the only way that you can make sure that your summary tables are accurate.
Well, actually, these numbers come straight away from the general ledger.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. But but from an internal controls perspective, going through this process, and you have this process in place, basically ensures that all of this stuff ties, except like $40,000 at the time.
So moving forward, if we include in there, is that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to.
The maintenance part is actually all this stuff because this is not
correct.
Right.
That's correct. But at the end of the day, right? It is a belt and suspenders way of ensuring that this complex part of the financials is always up to date. It always ties out, and basically it's clear. Again, if it's shuffled off to a different area, it's not part of the financial statements. It's going to be, at some point someone will say, I don't need to do this. I don't,
Gosh, I hope not.
You're not going to be here. You're not going to be here to crack the whip.
My legacy no.
But anyways,
I see your point.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely.
See what I'm saying? So are there any other comments on this? there's a lot of shaking of hands, and I understand that. So, I mean, I would like to make a motion to basically, for next year's financial statements, I would like to make a motion that states that the FY 2022 format is to be retained.
Well, can we do this? Can we just say this is the new format for the note?
No, what I want to say is the FY 22 format is retained, the new disclosure, the new accounting disclosure is retained, and the new tables you had two new tables. I don't know how to describe those two new tables.
Well, can't we just simplify it and say this is now the new format?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay.
So what do you call this document?
Oh, I called it the notes receivable, like there is notes receivable information.
So if we can say that the motion would be to incorporate the notes receivable information presented at the February 20th, it's the 20th, right? Still the 20th. The February 20th Audit Subcommittee meeting. That format of the notes receivable information is to be the format that is to be included in the ACF in the 2024 and onwards ACF. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Can we have a voice vote, please? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Passes unanimous. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Do we still?
So do we still, which do we still
Yeah,
have?
let me just real quickly, I just have a couple more things not related to the pension. I would just, in this big file on page 82 of 306, the report states that the impact to the city will be high if the city loses the case. The case refers to some litigation regarding to move or not to district conventions. And my only question on that is, what does the phrase "will be high" mean? And I'm just looking for a guess. Is this like 100 million, 10 million, 5 million dollars? Is this an issue to think about or not with respect to the financial statements?
I'll make one comment before I'll look to the city attorney to respond, but in financial statement terms, there's either no disclosure and a footnote, or disclosure and a footnote and accrual. So if something is likely or probable and estimable, meaning you know the amount, then you accrue. If it's something that you don't know what's going to happen or not, and you don't know necessarily the amount, then you do what we did, which is we disclose in a footnote. So then I'll look to the city attorney to respond to if he can.
In the CDRA case, at the trial court level, before it went up on appeal before, the plaintiffs made a request for, I think, $22 million in fees. And so it's been through the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court since then, so it would be higher than that eventually if they would prevail.
Although, there has been no motion regarding that.
Correct.
So even if they were to prevail, we could make a motion to reduce their fees, and that could be successful.
That would be the request, not necessarily what they would.
Right, that would be request, but not request.
Okay, and then just quickly, in a couple of different places, it talks about how the city will pursue $35 million worth of grants, which I think is great. Any idea of how that compares to other cities? I mean, is that a lot more than other cities get, or a lot less? What I'm really asking, is this potentially a major source of revenue going forward?
That I wouldn't know.
I don't know how to compare it to other cities. I mean, it is a significant amount that would help us.
I think it's difficult to compare because we apply for grants across a number of different of our business entities. So, for example, Big Blue Bus applies for grants for electrification, water applies for grants for a number of projects projects they're doing. So what gets challenging is the same set of services are provided across jurisdictions. So it would be hard to say whether or not that's comparable to a jurisdiction, for example, that doesn't have a water utility, doesn't run a bus operation. So that's just a difficult comparison.
The last question.
And if I could add to that, if you receive a grant, it is directed revenue. So it's directed toward a specific program. That money does not go into our general fund. It either goes into an enterprise fund or a specific program. So don't look at that as taking the place of general revenue, because it is always specific to a program.
Generally,
Anti-shoplifting, safe streets, music programs, whatever it may be, grants are always specific. Nobody gives you a grant and says, do what you want with it. So for instance, this afternoon, I turned in a list of potential grant opportunities to the city manager that I received this morning from a representative from the mayor, basically National Conference of Mayors. Now, some of those may not be viable or interesting to our city to apply for. Some may be, if there's a specific program that we want to enhance. That comes from that. So there's nothing to do with general revenue.
And I just mentioned that.
And by the way, receiving $35 million in grants is a hell of a good thing. I mean, really a tremendous benefit to the people of the city.
I echo that in spades, and I just want to call out a sentence that was on page 85 and 306 in this packet, which is 306 pages. It says, creative strategies are needed to leverage enterprise funds, grant funds, developer impact fees, etc. So kudos to the city for emphasizing the importance of going after all of these non-taxable, non-utility type revenue fees, or revenue opportunities. I think I had a question on. I think that's it. Okay, Mark, that was my question.
Okay. I think, are there any other questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, I seem to have lost my place on this one. Do we have a motion to receive and file the ACFR for 2023?
Second.
Subcommittee member Barr moved. Subcommittee member Rock seconded. We can take a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? None. Passed unanimously. Consent calendar.
I move we approve the minutes.
Actually, we're withdrawing those. That was on your agenda.
Okay. All right. So that'll be next time. Ethics hotline update. Is there a presentation?
No, just a verbal.
Okay.
Good evening, I'm Sarah Historic. I am the new HR manager over the labor relations in our HR department, and we manage the incoming ethics. The last time we presented before you was in November of 2022, so it's been about 15 months. Since then, we've had 9 submissions to the hotline in the last 15 months. So just a quick breakdown of those. 4 were categorized as other of the 13 categories a complainant can submit. One was for code enforcement, customer service, which was dismissed because it did not provide enough information. The other one was in regards to a city employee for taking allegations for taking money from a member of the public and from some food retailers. And that was resolved and sent to the department for an investigation and appropriate action was taken. The other one was about a complaint against a council member, which was sent to the city attorney's office and investigated and dismissed. Excuse me. The other two, one was for allegations of inappropriate illegal activity, which was dismissed because it did not provide enough information. And the other one was about a landlord-tenant issue, which was referred to the city attorney's office. The last four were of different variety. One was conflict of interest. It was about customer service in regards to city service, a request for city services by the city attorney's office, which was forwarded to the city attorney's office. The next two were allegations of discrimination, harassment, or violence in the workplace. And they were, one was for customer service in regards to code enforcement, which was forwarded to the department for handling, and appropriate action was taken there. And the other one did not provide enough information for us to investigate, and it had to do with allegations of city systems defrauding taxpayers. But again, not enough information was provided to proceed. And the last one was about unfair competition, bribery, etc. This is something that they could have chosen as a reason. But again, not enough information was provided by this person, and was dismissed. That's all I have.
And when, the only question I have is, when there's not enough information presented, who makes the determination that not enough information exists?
Sometimes my office does, sometimes the city attorney's office does. It does notify the person who submitted. When we respond indicating that not enough information was provided, which would give them an opportunity to provide us more information. And also have the notes revised where they follow up.
Shouldn't like the ethics hotline go to a third party?
It's
and not HR? I mean, not like a city employee.
Could a non-city employee report into it? Yeah.
No, but I'm just saying, because I mean, as a city employee, it would be very difficult for me to call HR regarding an ethics complaint.
So it's an anonymous submission portal that is, we have a third-party administrator that.
Okay, so then you don't know.
Unless they tell us who they are, we don't know.
They can choose to be completely anonymous.
Because I'm like, okay.
Well, and sometimes things are referred out to outside investigators for that independence, or some things may be referred to FEPC, depending on what it is.
We get complaints through other methods as well, not just the hotline. And they're handled in this similar fashion. Sometimes referred out to investigators or handled in.
But a third party is adjudicating most of this.
They're not adjudicating it. The third party is where the anonymity comes from, is that they go into the system and they can choose to be anonymous when they send it to us. And then when my office inputs a response, it is sent to that person.
To the third party person.
It's automated through this
Got it.
third party, so my response automatically goes to this person without me having to know
Who that is. Any other questions? Okay, can we have a motion to accept this report and file?
I move. Second.
So, Councilmember, Committee Member Brock moves, Committee Member Bush Seconds. All in favor? All opposed? None opposed, passed unanimously. Progress report on findings and observations. Oscar, you're up.
Yep, I'm up. So we had 14 items completed, so that's meeting. This is the update. All the updates are on the website, so you can find the details of every activity. I'm providing you just with the, based on our conversation, Mark, I'm providing just the updates of what happened between the
Excellent. Excellent.
So this one had no progress, but the information that was provided was that service level agreements were created, and we're reaching out to departments for feedback, and all that information is being incorporated into the administrative instructions. The second one, fleet utilization, limited progress on this as well, and it has to do with staffing changes and programs that may affect the centralized motor pool system. So implementation would be impacted by that. Also the availability of vehicles and changes in the regulations as well. Some of our vehicles are obsolete because of that. So no progress, but they did provide some information on it.
So wait a minute. So CARB changes their rules. Does that mean you have to get rid of perfectly good vehicles?
I think the way that, I don't know if we have to get rid of them, but it's the way that we're going to deploy them. It's different. I don't have details on that, but there is some information on the website for more which details of what it is we would do.
All right, that sounds a bit harsh.
Yeah. CERT, this one, again, no progress. We are in recruitment of the new Chief Information Officer, but what we are doing with the computer replacement program is we're starting to roll out computers. We anticipate that mid-2024, we're going to start rolling out 500 computers as part of this.
This was one of the reasons why we had all the problems with the airport systems, because there was a lack of a CIO. So how long has this position been open?
This position is actually, it's closing, I think, next month.
Let's see, we did an initial recruitment, and then the person walked away from the job. So then we reopened the recruitment beginning of this year, and so we closed, I think last week. They closed last week, so I haven't seen the people yet.
So this has been open for over a year?
No, it's been open. The initial recruitment opened in the fall, I want to say. It was open for about 6 weeks. Closed, we made an offer, didn't work out, and it was reopened again in January.
The HR organizational assessment, turns out that the reason that the previous report, there was hardly any updates, was HR was not updating the progress. They did now, with the new, the acting HR director, has updated all the stuff, so you see a lot of progress on here. They're 85%, I think we were, I forget what number we were at, I think 80%. But some of the things that have been accomplished, the third-party benefits administration system is live now. Policy and procedure inventory is in progress. The civil service reform planning continues, and staff is actively working on the remaining items. So there's only 6 remaining items. Again, there's additional detail on the website. This is a property managed one that we talked about, Mark. So they completed the review of the leasing policies and procedures, transition now to from RFPs to commercial brokers. We have a new economic development administrator who's continuing to monitor and streamline the processes. Rollout is underway for the Yard system, which will enable transition to electronic lease revenue collection, and also provide analytical reports to really manage the city's lease portfolio.
So, but this is Yardi so Yardi is, they're going back to Yardi at the airport, and this is Yardi for everything else?
Everything else.
So you're going to be on one system, basically?
Yes.
That's a great out. Okay.
Mobility study. So the work plan was established, KPIs were identified, and now the Department of Transportation is going to generate an annual report by the end of the fiscal year, which will integrate the mobility metrics and the KPIs. permitting system, the permitting system replacement installation is in progress. They're assessing 2 vendors and see who they're going to go with for the new permitting system. They completed customer service training for every single staff that's involved in the permitting process. They also created informational bulletins, which are published, to give guidance on popular building permit types and how to proceed with that. They have in-person appointments now for plan check services for residential projects, and then they're going to expand it to commercial tenant improvements as well in May of 2024. Inspector hours are available now as well for customers to come in and talk to the building inspector. Any questions? Airport leasing, so Yardi, the tenant payment portal, is to go live March 1st, 2024. This is the update that I was telling you that was missing from the conversation earlier. They are looking at additional master service agreements for maintenance. Expected completion of March 2024 as well. They hired a property maintenance supervisor position out to help with the maintenance of the facilities. The maintenance work order software system is being upgraded to improve the tenant customer service, but also the upgrade will include integrations with the CRP and also with the 311 services system. Capital controls. So we have the asset policy has been drafted. It incorporates all the audit findings. And then citywide department outreach will begin in March for this. This is the monitoring. So Moss Adams completed the follow-up and closeout of the grantee findings from the report of 2023. The RFP for the ongoing monitoring services was released today. Grantee reporting templates were updated to eliminate deficiencies. And they implemented a schedule of technical assistance workshops that are being rolled out there as well. Now on that one, I'll get clarification on the 2023 findings for what we talked about, people of concern, and I'll get back to the council on that.
That'd be great.
And those are the updates.
Any questions? Do we have a motion to accept the report as presented and filed?
I'll vote.
Second. So, block, Bush, no seconds. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, so this is where the agenda management on the fly occurs. I think, given the time of the evening, what the next item was review the procurement guidelines. I'd like to include that in the next meeting.
So I have my procurement manager here.
Yes.
She can give you an update on what we're doing. She's new to the city, but she has a plan on how we move forward with the confusion of the RFP that was defined. Is that okay? It's fast.
Of the art, I want to do her presentation justice. So if she does that, can she come back and we have the full discussion at the next meeting?
Sure.
I'm giving an abbreviated presentation now and then full-blown.
Yes, if we can do that, I think that would be great. Because I don't want to shortchange the good work that you're doing.
I've only been here a month, so not a whole lot.
The rumors are rampant on how good the work is.
Okay, well, good evening. I'm Teresa Villa, the new procurement manager. I'm very pleased to be here tonight and to report to you the latest updates with regards to the final report. Again, very brief. With the addition of the new procurement manager, the division has set 4 major priorities to benefit the city, staff, and supplier partners. First priority is to review and revise our policies and administrative instructions to provide clear and concise information to ensure best practices are applied, regulatory compliance is maintained, and efficiencies are implemented. Our second priority is to revamp our internal website to improve internal communications for staff. Our third priority is to provide a comprehensive procurement 101 training required for key stakeholders throughout the city with an emphasis on clarifying the requirements and the processes for competitive bidding in all procurements of goods and services. And finally, our fourth priority is to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion within the procurement. The audit report highlighted 2 RFPs for our current efforts, aligning our initiatives with best practices for DEI and procurement. Our update on those 2 RFPs are the first was the disparity study consultant. It is in the final phase of contract execution with a projected start date of March 1st. The other RFP was for our new marketplace system, which is in the beta phase, preparing for a soft launch in late spring. This system will not only provide an Amazon feel type shopping experience for our city staff, but is also geared toward assisting local and various disadvantaged business entities with their online presence with the hopes of expanding their markets. These last 2 efforts have generated a lot of excitement for our local suppliers, and with these 4 top priorities, we anticipate positive results over the next fiscal year and forward. That's it.
I like the sound of that. I still would like to invite you back
Oh,
to the
definitely.
next meeting so that we could just have a little bit more robust discussion. That sounds fantastic. Are there any questions? No questions provided. I would like to make a motion to accept this verbal report and file. And do I have a motion?
I'll move.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? That passes unanimously. So this last item is, I just want to cue this up for the next meeting. I understand that there's going to be a 5-year plan presented to the council between now and the next meeting. And what I'd like to do is have an item in the next meeting where there's a presentation made on the assumptions that are used in the long-range plan. I think a clear kind of outline of what those are will provide some excellent context from not only the subcommittee but also for the council members that are on this. So that is what I'd like to propose going forward. What I'd also like to add to that, however, is David, you were looking at your state projections for the miscellaneous fund, right, for pensions. Is there any way that we can include in this long-range plan the ultra long-range things that the state has provided you, so that we have a kind of that bigger that long-range picture as to what happens with peak and then the trough and the elimination of the unfunded liability? Is that something that can be included in that? Whatever the state is providing.
Well, we forecast out for 5 years. I don't think doing a 30-year forecast is all that helpful. So are you asking us to do a 30-year financial forecast?
No, I'm just saying, to the extent that you have the information already, right. Is that it just help? I think it would help everyone understand to see what that curve looks like, because even with the 5-year thing, it's going to get worse in the 5-year thing. If you were just looking at the unfunded liability, it gets much worse. But the point is, it'd be, I think, helpful for everyone to see what the peak worst is, and then how it goes down to very manageable.
Yeah, it's all public information, so it's no problem.
That'd be great. Yeah, no work on your part, just for presenting what the state's providing would be fantastic.
Yeah.
So with that, I'd like to, propose a motion that basically provides for the next meeting an agenda item that outlines the core assumptions in the long-range plan, and to include these state tables for pension. Do I have a second?
I have a quick question first, and that is, maybe this is part of the request, but is it also possible to give an indication of how we're doing this fiscal year? In other words, fiscal year 23, 24, sort of where we are, there are any surprises now?
That's the meeting, isn't it?
Year-to-date expenditure report?
Yeah, but is that going to be part of your report to council?
Well, we assume expenditure meet budget, right? So I'm not giving you year-to-date on that. But what I'm giving council is my projection of over the 5 years, what our expenditures will grow by and the revenues too. So no, it's not necessarily a year-to-date report. If that's what you're
But you do provide that to council at some point, don't you?
We do the year report, which is in October, and we provide council with the, and that's unaudited numbers, right?
Right,
Yeah.
So there is there is not a July through December sort of look. I know that's half a fiscal year. I guess that's what I was seeking. I thought it was one of the two items that was in the back of one of those.
Yeah, so what we do with mid-year is we look at our revenues and how they're tracking, our expenditures as well. Expenditures we don't necessarily adjust unless we have something like CalPERS numbers or anything like that. We really look at our focus on our mid-year revenues. Based on that, we update our forecast in the out years. But we're not looking at, we're going to end the year this way. I mean, we can, but that's not something that's included in our mid-year report.
When is the mid-year report?
It's actually coming out this week.
We need to press approve on it. Right.
I'm sorry, so the mid-year report is, what is that, a half a fiscal year?
That's a half fiscal year. Basically, we use that to update our forecast.
Okay, so that's it, that's.
Watch the council meeting.
Yeah.
That's the address, watch the council.
So that's going to be presented to council?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. All right.
I don't know where to go with it.
Any other questions? Okay, so,
I'll make your motion. Motion you request.
We just need a second.
can you second that?
I'll second.
You're right. Okay. And then, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? No. That passes unanimously. And with that, we adjourn the meeting at 9:23. Thank you so much, everyone. Randy, can you email me that link? Can you email me that?
I can walk, yes, it works. Well, for me, it works.